A person thinks that he will never forgive his abuser's thunder, hurt and lightning flashes. A person is in the forest at this time. It is raining, the drops of which are flowing down the statue of a man reaching for the sky with his hand. The guy couldn't move. He wondered how much time had passed. He wondered if his end had come. There were too many questions in his mind because of panic and fear. The guy remembers how other school children stood in front of him, who mocked him and asked why the school needed him. So passed all his days at school because the guy had a useless skill. The guy remembers how his only close person at school said that he was tired of pretending to be his friend. The guy felt terrible. Then he did not suspect that he was being deceived, even by a close person. Someone decided to try their new magic on the guy, so he became a non-moving statue. He couldn't move as he was turned into stone. The guy froze and could not understand how much time had passed since he turned to stone. He couldn't keep track of time, as he was constantly thinking about all the events that had happened to him. The guy gritted his teeth. He repeated several times that he hated everyone and everything. He's not going to take it anymore. And he does not decide that he will definitely stay alive. He is very determined. The guy is enveloped in a strong aura, and he decides that he must take revenge on all his abusers. He won't leave them alone until they get what they deserve. His abusers have done a lot of unpleasant things. Some time ago, the guy was at the Synth School of Magic. In this school, heroes were trained to defeat a demon king, who attacked villages and got rid of the heroes. School children were taught magic and various spells. Everyone had some kind of specific ability, whether it was invisibility, shield creation, fire and the like. There were a huge number of abilities. There was a crowd of teenagers right in the backyard of the school. The red-haired guy was mocking the blonde guy. The red-haired guy punched him in the stomach and asked when he would leave their school. He was very aggressive. The blonde guy fell to the ground and began to shake himself off, holding on to his stomach. The blonde guy's name was Abel. He was exactly the one who was constantly mocked by other students. Because he was not outstanding, he didn't have any ability. The red-haired guy started shouting that they were studying at the biggest school of magic. This place was an institution for the real elite. The red-haired guy swung his fist, saying that there is no place for such a weak person without a normal skill, like Abel. The guy closed his eyes, waiting for the blow. With the fist of the red-haired guy hit the shield, which appeared right in front of the young man. He will relax for a second as he felt safe. The blonde guy drew attention to himself. He asked if everyone in this school really aspires to become heroes. He is interested in whether the guys studying for heroes behave decently. The blonde guy's name is Stark. It was he who created the shield right in front of Abel. Everyone screamed. When they saw the guy, he will try to catch his breath while the rest of the students cursed and left. Stark reached out to help people up from the ground. He will thank the guy, and Stark replies that anyone would have done the same. Stark invited Abel to go up to the roof of the school. Stark and Abel were sitting on the roof of the school. Stark asked why Abel didn't fight back. Abel laughed. Stark had expected a very different reaction. He's watching the guy. Abel says the bullies are right, that his skill is useless. Stark asks if the guy really has the decoding skill. Abel closes his eyes and confirms he has the spirit skill decoding. Even if you activate this skill, nothing will happen. The strange white screen just pops up in the guy's head. Abel says that there is not a single mention of this skill in the school library. Nothing is known about it, not a single document, textbook, or even an article that could reveal the essence of this skill. Abel remembers how he accidentally got this skill when he caught a spirit in the forest as a child. And then his life went on at the usual pace and he did not take any action. Abel says he doesn't want to be a hero, he doesn't need it. Stark thinks about it and says that it seems to him that Abel's skill is not so simple. There is something special about it. Abel doubts it. He can't believe that his skill will come in handy someday and somewhere. Abel talks about giving his childhood friend a promise to come back when he graduates from school. He's going to go back to the village. Stark asks what kind of girl. Stark puts his hand on the guy's shoulders and says that he wanted to team up with him to become an adventurer. He thought they could defeat monsters together. Abel sighs and says, "It's definitely impossible." Abel thought at that moment that he could always trust his friend Stark. That day was a bright and sunny day, which did not portend anything bad, but the fateful day has come anyway. A man in white clothes went up on stage in front of a huge crowd of school children to tell one very important news. A man in white clothes reports that a vision was granted to them the day before. All the students were intrigued by the news as it concerned the vision. The man reports that the school board decides to choose a group of heroes who will challenge the Demon King and defeat him. All the students are shocked. He will also can't believe it. He thinks that Stark would be perfect for the role of a member of the squad. The man continues and says that the following heroes will go: Hero Stark, Black Magician Lanoa, Paladin Aden, the Monk Moss, Warrior Gordon. They were chosen to be the ones who would overthrow the Demon King. Many of these students are quite capable heroes who have already managed to show their best side. They had exceptional abilities and had chances to win. Abel rejoices that Stark has been chosen as one of those who will go to fight the Demon King. Stark was perfect for this role. Moreover, the guy wanted to show himself in his abilities for a very long time. Then the man continues and informs that Abel will be the last to go with the decryption skill. The guy is stunned. He can't believe he's just been called. He thinks he heard it. Many school children are wondering why they took him. They think the guy has a useless skill. Someone in the audience asks where Abel can be useful. All the named school children were equipped and prepared for battle. The next morning, they were already on their way to defeat the Demon King. They were sure that the vision could not deceive them. All the named students were moving towards the Demon King's fortress. Abel was walking at the very end. He really didn't want to participate in something like this, but he still had to. Abel thought that he was completely useless. He wondered why he had been chosen. He's considering leaving before it's too late. Otherwise, he may not survive when meeting monsters or the Demon King himself. Abel turns to Stark and tries to tell him about his decision to leave. Abel hopes for Stark's understanding because he has always been there for him and supported him. You could say he was his only friend at school, but Stark sharply strikes the guy. Abel doesn't understand what happened. Stark picked Abel up by the color of his shirt and said that the guy should address him as a gentleman. Abel was terrified. He did not see the same friendly guy with whom he had recently been sitting on the roof. Stark lowers the young man to the ground and asks him not to judge. Stark tells that he helped Abel in order to be chosen to the group of heroes. Now that their mission has begun, Stark will treat the guy very differently. Stark says he just can't stand weak people. He reports that the game of friends is over. Abel is crying and can't believe what Stark said. He thought they were friends, or at least good acquaintances. It was from that moment that the difficulties began. Since Abel was useless in battle, he carried all the luggage, and in battle, he was used as a human shield. Abel was also used to check traps. Other members of the group did not miss the opportunity to laugh at the guy. They all believed that Abel was superfluous in their team, since his skill was useless both on the front line and battle and in the role of protection. Stark shouted at the guy that he was moving too slowly. He says the guy is just carrying things. They decide to punish Abel, so they leave him sleeping on the street. The guy gets very upset when they decide to leave him on the street. Stark says they're all going to play at the casino. All the students are happy. Well, Abel is left alone on the street, but no one pays attention to him. All the heroes just leave and leave the young man with things near the tree. Abel wonders why he is being treated so terribly. He doesn't understand what he's done to deserve this. The guy never touched anyone and behaved appropriately, but everyone still mocked him. Abel still wonders why he was taken into the group of heroes at all. The vision seemed very strange only because Abel was present in it. He didn't understand his role in all this. Suddenly, there is thunder and lightning flashes right in front of the students. A creature appears that smiles rapaciously. It asks if the school children are the very heroes who were sent to him to fight. Stark and Abel are shocked by his appearance. They weren't even halfway to the Demon King's stronghold yet, so they weren't preparing for battle, especially a fight with such a serious opponent. A strategy was necessary. At this time, the creature continues and says that it is a waste of time for him. He's not really in the mood for a fight, especially with school children. This is not the level of the Demon King at all. All the heroes can't believe that the Demon King handle appeared right in front of them. They had never seen him live and didn't know what to expect from him. But the students were sure that the Demon King knows a lot of spells. The Demon King was smiling rapaciously. Abel stared at the demon in horror. From that moment on, his hatred flared up like hellfire. Stark trying to clear his throat. He could not believe his defeat. As he was chosen as the chosen one, he considered himself an elite. After all, he was one of the strongest heroes in the school and had quite good magic skills. The Demon King was able to defeat all the heroes. They were all unconscious. Someone was slowly recovering, but could not at least get up from his knees to continue the fight or retreat and return to school. Stark was sitting on his knees in front of him, and now had an idea of what a terrible demon king. He didn't expect them to meet him. All the heroes couldn't fight anymore. They wanted to go home. Abel was crawling on the ground. He looked at the demon king in shock and did not understand how they could meet him in the middle of the way. The guy was very scared. He didn't want to meet his end at all. The demon king was floating in the air. He put his hand to his chin and asked if the students were really heroes in his eyes. They looked very weak and incapable of anything. He expected at least some kind of rebuff. The demon king says that the students were somehow too weak. He didn't even enjoy it. He decides to try his new magic on school children, which turns everyone to stone. School children create shields to hide from the impact, but she don't help much since the demon king's magic is still stronger. Abel screams. He sees a huge magic beam heading towards Stark. Abel runs to the guide. Stark turns around and sees Abel pushing him away, falling under the beam. Abel's whole body is covered with a hard shell and he freezes like a statue. The guy can't move or make any sound. He can only watch as Stark approaches him. Stark leans towards Abel and then he quickly gets up and runs away, shouting to the guy that he did a great job. Stark gives the command to everyone to run and the heroes obey him. They all retreat in the hope of returning back to school and surviving. The demon lord looked at the running schoolboys with disgust. He couldn't believe that they were heroes. The demon king lost interest in them and decided to return home. He froze like a statue. He was trying to figure out what was happening to him. The guy was terrified as he couldn't move. He was petrified. The guy tried to calm himself down, but he didn't do it well. The guy was thinking that Stark and the rest of the students would come for him soon to save him. He himself did not understand why he still believed in something like this after everything he had experienced during their joint hike. He remembers how Stark and all the other students looked at him with dislike. He gritted his teeth as he realized that they wouldn't come back to save him. He is sure of it, because they have escaped and will not return. Abel decides that he has to deal with everything somehow by himself. Suddenly, a huge screen with inscriptions appears right in front of the guy. The guy looks dumbfounded at the screen. He understands that this is a spirit skill. He's trying to figure out what's going on. The guy touches the screen and wonders where so much text came from. After all, there was nothing before previously. There was only a white flash and nothing else. Had his skill awakened. The guy notices the inscription, the magic of petrification, the Gorgon's gaze. He understands that this is exactly the same spell that turned him to stone. The guy begins to guess that this is the magic of the Demon King. When activating skills, Abel can learn his formula. The guy understands that if he can decipher the formula, then he will be able to remove the petrification and further use this spell for his own purposes. But it's not that simple. Deciphering the formula of the complex magic of the Demon King is difficult with Abel's magic power. It will definitely be a long process. Moreover, he is doing this for the first time. Abel can decipher no more lines, and then the magic power will run out and he will lose consciousness, and the characters on the screen are clearly not less than 10,000. This is too huge a number. You will lose consciousness and rise again to decipher. The guy was very tired because he repeated this ritual from time to time, but the volume of his magical power has grown. The guy was very tense as the task was clearly not easy. The guy took off his shirt and fell to the floor. He was swearing because he didn't understand why he agreed to go to the kingdom of the Demon King. He didn't want to go with a group of heroes who hated him. The guy looked at the medallion and remembered Sarah, a girl from the village. He remembers how the girl handed him the locket and asked him to take it because it performed a protective function. The girl asked the guy to come back as soon as possible. The guy clenches his jaw with tension. He just wanted a quiet life. He can't accept that Stark left him alone. He thought Stark was his only true friend, but he turned out to be a traitor. It's been a very long time. The guy felt like he was going crazy. He was having crazy thoughts. He didn't understand how much time had passed and whether he should continue deciphering the spell. The guy clenched his hand into a fist and decided that he would take revenge on his abusers. The guy decided that he would do it even if this one took decades. He will get out and take revenge. As a result, the guy lost track of time. The guy deciphered the spell from time to time. Abel stared intently at the symbols. The last character remained, which after a few seconds was also deciphered. Like all the others, it seemed that his work was over and something was going to happen. The decryption was completed. The guy's screen starts to glow and Abel is blinded by a bright light. Opening his eyes, the guy wakes up in the real world. He was still standing on the field, not moving. Suddenly the guy begins to feel how the hard shell on his body is being destroyed. He felt that he was becoming freer. Then, when the entire hard shell was destroyed, the guy stood up and raised his head to the sky. He gazed at the sky and enjoyed the moment of liberation from imprisonment. He was thinking about what he would do next, but his thoughts were interrupted. Suddenly, the guy heard someone scream. Someone asked for help. The guy turned around and saw a red-haired girl who was trying to escape from the monsters. She screamed and tried to speed up, but it was clear that she no longer had the strength. One of the monsters asked the other monsters to pay attention to Abel. They all turned to the guy and looked at him. One of the monsters sees Abel and licking his lips thinks that the guy will taste better, so he decides to eat him instead of the girl. Another monster growled and said that he would like any person. They continued to chase the girl to enjoy her taste. When the monsters began to pull their hands towards the girl, she screamed and cried, realizing that she was caught. The girl thought that her end had come, but suddenly a bright flash of light appeared behind the monsters, which blinded everyone and forced them to stop for a moment. They all froze, unable to move. They all became statues that couldn't move. Thus the guy stopped the pursuit. The monster did not have time to reach the girl. As he turned to stone, the girl looked at the monster in shock. She was trying to figure out what was going on. Understanding took a very long time, because a second ago, she was on the verge of life and death. The monster looked at the guy and realized that he was using the magic of the Demon King. He's trying to figure out how the guy can use petrification because it's a very complex spell that only the Demon King uses. Monsters surrounded the guy. One of them asks how the guy can use such complex spells. Another monster says that only the Demon King can use such spells. One of the monsters took off and, folding the seals with his hands, began to attack with fire. He shouted at the guy that he would not be able to dodge the attack. The monster attacked randomly without even trying to aim somehow. Abel created a shield and shielded himself from the fiery attack. The guy was able to hide from the attacks for a while. The monster was shocked. He couldn't figure out why his attack didn't work. After all, he used his most powerful spell that he knows. He wanted to try to attack the youths again, but he was interrupted. The guy started using the petrification spell again. The monster screamed and tried to escape, but it was too late, as Abel had already used the spell. The monsters couldn't believe that Abel could not only use the magic of the Demon King, but also block their magic. They were stunned. While all the monsters were frozen in stone, they were trying to figure out who the guy was. At that moment, Abel realized how his decoding skill worked. Firstly, it allows you to disassemble and cancel the magic formula of spells. This is a pretty useful feature. Secondly, the decryption skill allows you to use the decrypted magic yourself. In addition to having deciphered the complex magic of the Demon King, Abel began to decipher ordinary magic easily and quickly. That is why the magic of the lower demons is no longer a threat to Abel, and he can easily decipher it and then use it against them so he can handle anyone. Abel's stock of magical power grew due to the fact that he constantly depleted it. During the decoding of the Demon King spell, he was able to reach incredible heights. Because of his hard work with decoding, Abel has become perhaps the most powerful magician in the world. Now he could decipher any spell and become its owner. With this skill, you can defeat the Demon King himself. With this power, the guy will be able to reach incredible heights and take revenge on his abusers. Abel was approached by a girl who was running from monsters. She stood right in front of the guy and thanked him for saving her. The girl was very happy about her rescue as she still had relatives in the village. The guy stared at the girl. After a second, he said he had a question. He asks where the heroes are at the moment. He was trying to find out all possible information to find out. The girl at first does not understand what kind of heroes you're talking about, and then remembers and says that she used to hear a story about how the Demon King caught them all. But that happened 20 years ago. The guy can't believe that 20 years have passed. He's shocked. After a second, he turns away from the girl and asks if he really has been in the stone for 20 years. A girl runs down the road. She turns around and waves to the guy, indicating that he should follow her. She informs him that they should soon reach the village. The girl decided to attract the guy's attention, so she called him by name. At this time, the young man looked gloomily at the ground under his feet and thoughtlessly walked behind the girl. The guy succumbed to his feelings. The guy was really surprised when the girl he saved told him that 20 years had passed since the heroes lost to the Demon King and ran away somewhere the world was under the control of the Demon King. Most of the survivors became slaves of the Demon King's army, or in rare cases they live on the outskirts of the land. Everyone was running and trying to hide away from the Demon King's army. Many people had to hide in different corners. As monsters checked all the surroundings, people couldn't believe that the heroes had run away and left everyone to their fate. The girl turns sharply to the guy and says that she completely forgot to introduce herself. She gave her a name, Leela, and then she thanked the guy again for her rescue. Leela says she can't believe that Abel is very strong. She thinks he's one of the heroes. The girl hopes that the hero will help her in her village. Perhaps he could protect her from the monsters once more. Suddenly, the girl asks if Abel is from the group of heroes. The guy screams, scaring the girl. He asks how the girl could think that the guide is from a group of heroes. He doesn't want to be counted among the group of terrible vain people. Leela hides behind the cave and apologizes. She says she didn't mean to offend the guy. The guy sighs because he did not expect that he would scare the girl so much, but it was really unpleasant for him to remember about the heroes. Abel puts his hand to his chin and apologizes to the girl. He admits that he broke down because of his tense state. The guy says he doesn't want to hear anything more about the hero group. The girl immediately agrees. She jumps out from around the corner where she was hiding and apologizes. She comes closer to the guy to look at his face and see if he is calmed down or is still angry. Then the guy gets more serious again. He asks the girl to stop and decides to ask her something else. Abel recalls that the girl said that in her village, there is one of the group of heroes. The girl turns around and smiling says that this is really true. If the girl remembers correctly, then this very hero is called Gordon from the dwarf clan. He was Gordon who came to their village and helped them for a while. The guy remembers a short schoolboy with red hair, who was constantly grinning. Abel recognizes him immediately. He's terrified. The dwarf was not the most pleasant creature in their group. The guy remembers how during one of the halts a dwarf approached him and struck him right on the stomach. While the guy was trying to catch his breath, the dwarf mocked him. He was very cruel. The dwarf turned to the guy and told him not to be discouraged. The dwarf gave his name and said that he would not turn away from the guy and would train him until he became a strong hero, but his training methods were unhealthy. They only made it worse for the guy. The guy at that moment howled in pain. He asked what it meant. It seems to him that the gnome's approach is not like regular training. The training sessions were too brutal, and the guy recovered after them for a long time. The dwarf at that moment demanded that Abel be silent. He didn't want to hear the guy's excuses. He just wanted the guy to take all the blows and keep quiet. He believed that this would help him become strong. The dwarf raised the volume of his voice and said that the group of heroes is only for the strongest. He believes that those who are weaker than him have no right to even speak. He didn't think Abel was worth anything in their team. The dwarf was asking if the guy understood him. He needed a clear answer and unquestioning fulfillment of his instructions. He demanded that the guy get up and practice his punches at this time. All the other members of the group looked at the gnome and Abel with dislike. It was the door from the whole group of heroes who most often made a punching bag out of him. He was practicing punches on the guy. He did not stop and constantly approached the guy to once again test his strength and durability. The guy will never forget his face, his brown eyes, and the grin that was always on his face. He recalled with horror the appearance of the dwarf who had mocked him. He wanted to take revenge on him for all the damage caused. Abel remembers that the dwarf had the eyes not of a warrior, but the eyes of someone who likes to mock the weak. Abel suggests that the dwarf just liked to watch those weaker than him squirm in front of his feet. Abel is very tense because of the flooding memories. Leela has been trying to bring Abel back to consciousness all this time. She was asking if the guy was okay. The girl leaned over and smiled at the guy. Abel could not say a word at first, but then he still gave a monosyllabic answer to her question. The guy turns around and notices that the sun is about to set. The girl offers to spend the night on the street. Since they have not reached the village, they were already close to the village, but it was worth making a halt. Abel says there are a lot of monsters out hunting at night. He reminds the girl that they should not lose their vigilance if they do not want to fall into a trap or be eaten by monsters. Abel and Leela were sitting around the fire and trying to warm up. It was night outside, so they decided to make a stop. There was no point in continuing the way as monsters could attack them. Moreover, They needed to rest. The guy asked how she turned out to be so far from her own village. The girl says she wanted to collect medicinal herbs for the residents. Her mom tried to stop the girl, but there was nothing left around the village. Then the guy thinks about it and still decides to ask Layla how Gordon ended up in their village. He wonders if the dwarf was really doing his duty as a hero or he was just hiding. The girl looked at the fire with a smile and said that Gordon was considered a bodyguard in their village. She talks about Gordon protecting their village from monsters. Abel should have guessed. He thinks that Gordon just hid in the village and now lives there quietly and peacefully. Gordon is not the kind of dwarf who would risk his life to save other people. Then Leela asks the guy why he is looking for members of the hero group. The guy sighs and says that it does not concern the girl. He doesn't want to reveal his motives. Moreover, they have only recently met. He shouldn't trust the girl yet. Leela asks if she can try to guess. Leela smiles and says that she will be able to guess correctly right away. She assumes that Abel wants to defeat the Demon King. She thinks that the guy will gather all the surviving heroes and raises a rebellion against the Demon King. The girl argues that if a guy unites with the heroes, then the days of the reign of the Demon King are numbered. She believes that a team of heroes will be able to defeat the Demon King and Rat. The guy opens his eyes wide and surprise and grits his teeth in anger. He abruptly turns his back to the girl and demands that she put out the fire as he is going to go to bed. The girl does not ask unnecessary questions and does as the guy asked. She takes a pot of water and pours the water directly on the fire, and then he lies back on his sleeping bag. The guy is lying and glaring straight at the wall at the moment. He doesn't care about the Demon King. His main goal is to take revenge on the heroes who betrayed him and ran away like cowards. He would never forgive them for that. A guy needs strength for his goal. He squeezes his hand and thinks about how he will make the heroes pay for their act. In general, his skill does not seem so useless to him now. He wants them to feel the same as he did at the moment of petrification, horror and fear. Abel believes that the heroes deserve the same fate as him for all their deeds. The guy thinks that he was able to get out only thanks to his useless skill. He never expected that the skill would save him because there was no information about him, and he never used it once. Around the guy's neck hung a pendant given by a girl from the village. It shone brightly. At this time, Leela was asleep and did not assume that the guy had exactly the same pendant as her. The guy has not noticed the pendant yet, so he does not guess about the connection between Leela and Sarah. In the afternoon, Leela and Abel set off again. The girl informed the guy that they had almost come to the right place. She couldn't wait to finally return to her village. The girl says that they only need to climb the mountain to see the whole village and the descent to it. This way they will be able to get to her house very quickly and see her mother. When the girl gets up, she stops near the side exclaiming. The guy does not understand what surprised the girl. He sees only how she looks at the village with horror and opens her mouth trying to say something. Leela tells Abel to look at the village. He will comply with the request and was also shocked. He wondered what had happened to the village. She was all on fire and was in the wreckage. People and monsters were running everywhere. The girl screamed in horror asking what was going on. She saw people running and screaming. She couldn't believe that monsters were attacking her village. Leela was very worried about her mother. The girl along with Abel approached the guy who apparently was injured. The girl leaned over to the guy and asked if he was okay and what was going on. The guy was bruised. The guy first gathered all his strength to respond and then reported that the army of the Demon King attacked the village. He said that an army of demons had come for Gordon. They were looking for a hero. The girl couldn't believe it. She wondered what it all meant and where Gordon was. She believed that the hero had to save them, but he was hiding somewhere while everyone else was trying to escape. Abel suddenly heard someone shout and turned around. He saw demons growling and raising their weapons in order to attack the villagers. They liked to mock people. The demons were grinning. One of them tried to apologize for the fact that they all came to the village. Another demon chuckled and said that they would be given a promotion for catching one of the group of heroes. A grandmother was sitting on the ground. She was soothing a child who was sitting on her lap, while the grandmother was saying that protect your grandson. The boy was screaming in horror. He was very much afraid of the demons that attacked their village. The demon swung speaking negatively about the grandmother. He was going to stab helpless victims. He swung his weapon and almost struck, but at that moment, something prevented him. Right between the demon and the grandmother with the child, Abel appeared, who used the petrification spell. He was able to turn the demon into stone, and it froze without touching its victims. All the demons are shocked. The grandmother and her grandson also did not understand what was happening. The monsters looked at Abel and tried to figure out who he was. They were angry because an ordinary guy dared to interfere with them during a raid on the village. The monsters attacked the villagers while they were screaming and asking for help. One of the monsters ran up to the orc bout and reported that reinforcements had come to them. The orc asked what had happened. All the monsters decided to attack Abel, the most important monster with red hair and a scar, who was holding a cage with a hostage in his hand. Was at first at a loss because of the news about an ordinary guy, which hinders their raid. The orc looked down at the guy and asked if he really could defeat his monsters. He says that his subordinates are useless since they could not defeat some ordinary guy. The guy looks anxiously at the monster as he sees that an emaciated Gordon is sitting in the cage. The dwarf looked terrible. He did not try to free himself from the cage as he resigned himself to his fate. Gordon saw the guy and cried out in surprise. He hadn't expected to see Abel again. The guy says that the hero has changed a lot. He asks him if he has gone on a diet. Gordon was sweating from the exertion. Beads of sweat dripped down his face as he tried to figure out how Abel was able to survive. He was very much strained by the unexpected appearance of a schoolboy, whom he and the heroes threw on the battlefield with the Demon King. The orc raises the cage with Gordon higher and asks if they really know Abel. He is interested because he can use this information for his own purposes. The orc wouldn't mind catching another hero to get a bonus. The orc turns to Abel and asks if the guy is aware that Gordon tried to escape again, despite the fact that he was a member of the hero group. He looks at Gordon with contempt and then returns his gaze to Abel and continues. The orc says that Gordon did not even try to fight, but immediately surrendered just to save his own life. He is sure that Gordon cannot have the status of a hero since he is an ordinary coward. Gordon turns to the monster, chuckles and asks what's wrong with his escape. He grins and does not understand what he has done wrong. Gordon says that only his life is important to him. He believes that this is an adequate position. Gordon shouts to Abel that he doesn't know how the guy was able to survive, but in his opinion, the guy has no right to condemn him. Abel looks grimly at Gordon. He assumed that the hero was really a real coward who could only mock others. Abel turns to the monster and asks why he needs Gordon. He offers a deal. Abel will let all the monsters go only if the orc lets Gordon go. The guy doesn't want to fight. The orc strikes his weapon at the place where Abel was and says that he doesn't like the way the guy talks to him. The monster asks if the guy really thinks he can defeat him, and his subordinates. Abel dodges the blow. Meanwhile, the orc continues and says that a man like Abel does not have a drop of strength to overcome him. Among the entire army of the Demon King, he is the only orc who can use magic. The orc folds the seal and sends a magical dragon towards Abel. The guy creates a shield with his ability and covers himself with it. Abel closes his eyes and tells the orc that all he can boast of is his magic. The guy again found himself near a huge screen with the text of spells. The guy was able to decipher a new spell. He put his hand forward and folded the magic seal. His hands lit up with green fire. A second later, a huge magical dragon of green color burst out of the guy's hand, which headed towards the orc. The orc froze in surprise as the guy used exactly the same spell as him. The orc stared in amazement at the magical dragon that was heading in his direction. He was sweating from the strain and couldn't say a word, much less counterattack. The dragon was too fast and powerful. A second later, there was a loud cry from the orc, who could not dodge the blow and fell directly under the attack of the magic dragon. The orcs did not expect such a powerful attack, so he lost at the very beginning of the battle. Gordon clutched the bars of the cage in his hands and screamed because the orc let go of the cage. His cage abruptly flew towards Abel and he caught it with one hand, holding it directly over his head. Gordon calmed down for a second. Abel lowers the cage and apologizes to the orc. He didn't want to fight him. The guy wanted to solve everything peacefully, but the circumstances themselves forced him to join the fight. The guy was upset by this outcome. He says the orc is no match for him. Gordon was still clutching the bars in his hands and was looking at the guy dumbfounded. He couldn't believe that the guy had become so strong. He remembered that Abel had a useless skill. Gordon couldn't close his mouth in surprise. He looks at the place where the orc was and sees only an empty place covered with dust. The orc was gone after one attack by Abel. It was too powerful. He wonders if this is really their useless Abel. Gordon smiles rapaciously. He hopes that he will be able to persuade the young man to help him. He thinks that with Angel's help he can achieve his safety. All the monsters ran away from the village in fright. They screamed in fear and tried not to catch bulls as their leader was defeated by just one magic spell. Abel was suddenly addressed by Gordon. The guy looked at him seriously and saw how the man was still sitting in the cage and bowing to the guy. He tries to appease Abel to give him the opportunity to free himself from the cage. He recognizes Abel's strength and says that his strength has no limits. He didn't expect the guy to become so strong. He says that he remembered the guy completely different, but he changed. Gordon tries to convince Abel that he has opened the eyes of a man and now he has seen the real strength of AS. He claims that he saw the potential in the young man during their joint campaign against the Demon King. While Abel is not impressed, he looks at the man who vows to him. Gordon continues and asks him to excuse his rudeness. He calls Abel a real hero again. Gordon looks up and asks Abel to show his condescension. He promises that he will be faithful to the guy for the rest of his life. He thinks he was able to appease the guy and now he will be released. The crack of iron bars is sharply heard. Abel breaks the bars of the cage and squeezes Gordon's throat in his hands. The dwarf is very tense and begins to suffocate. The guy squeezes his throat harder and the dwarf starts coughing. Abel speaks negatively about the dwarf. He raises the volume of his voice and asks if Gordon himself is ashamed of his behavior. He's amazed of his audacity. Abel doesn't consider Gordon a real hero. Abel was very angry. He reminds Gordon that the dwarf was mocking him, looked up and down. The guy is outraged because the dwarf decided to ask for leniency after all the harm he did to the guy. Tears gather at the edges of Gordon's eyes. He only let out a squeak as he was very scared. He couldn't recognize Abel. The guy seemed to him very angry and cruel. Although he had not dared to say anything to the heroes before. Abel tightens his grip on the gnome's throat and demands that he give him information about the rest of the group. He says that if the dwarf shares the information, then maybe the guy will spare him. He promises nothing but assures the dwarf that he should tell at least some information otherwise. Gordon asks if the guy will really spare him if he gives out information about other heroes. Gordon was very much afraid for his life. He didn't want to leave the world of the living. Moreover, this is not how he imagined his end of life. After a second, Gordon begins to tell everything he knows about the heroes and their whereabouts. Abel listens attentively and does not interrupt. He is waiting for the moment when he can take revenge on his abusers. After his story, Gordon smiles and chuckles. He asks if Abel will let him go now because he has told everything. Tador thinks that Abel remains the same soft and pathetic guy who decides to let him go. Abel lowers his head and says that he will fulfill part of the terms of their contract. Then he raises his head and squeezing Gordon's throat harder in his hand says that he will spare his life, but on one condition. The guy then uses his new spell and opens the seal behind the man. Gordon gets scared. He does not immediately realize that his body is covered with a stone shell. Gordon screamed in fear and asked what the guy was doing. Abel looks gloomily at the man and says that he can enjoy. Leela tried to stop the young man but she did not have time. And Abel at this moment tells Gordon that he will not forget what the heroes did to him. While Gordon was frozen in stone, the guy talked about how he was looking forward to the day of his revenge when he was in stone. The girl looks at the guy in horror and can't believe that he turned out to be such a cruel person. Abel says finally that it's too late for Gordon to apologize. The guy grins and says that the dwarf should feel what the guy feels while he was in the stone. Part of Gordon's face was still frozen. His face looked scared. He tried to move his arm but nothing worked. His body was completely covered with a stone shell and he froze. The stone statue of Gordon fell to the ground. Abel just stared at him. All the villagers came out of their hiding places and looked in horror at what had happened to Gordon. One resident of the village was going to run up to Gordon as she was worried about him, but the man stopped her. You looked at Abel, who had chased away the Demon King's army. Abel heard a woman run up to Leela who screamed with joy because her daughter survived. She started asking her daughter if she was okay. Leela was very happy to see her mother. Then Abel turned around and was shocked. He saw his childhood friend who had grown up. Apparently she was the mother of Leela. The guy froze and looked dumbfounded at his girlfriend. Abel started approaching the woman and asking if her name was Sarah. The woman immediately recognizable. She was worried. Then the woman ran up to the guy and asked if it was really him. She asked where he had been for so long. The guy couldn't say a word. The woman started crying and reaching out to the guy. She says that they haven't seen each other for a very long time, and that she would like to talk to him about a lot, just like before. The guy remembers how before leaving for school, Sarah gave him the pendant and asked him to come back as soon as possible. Sarah was Abel's only close friend Ben. He was constantly thinking about his return to her. The woman reached out to the guy with her hand. Abel had been standing with downcast eyes all this time. He took out the pendant and returned it to his childhood friend, apologizing for not keeping his promise. Abel turned around and went to look for heroes. He didn't want to see his childhood friend anymore because he couldn't keep his promise. He won't be able to live like an ordinary person anymore. While Sarah and Leela are looking at the young man's retreating back, Abel goes forward and decides that he will use his skill to take revenge on the heroes and the Demon King. He is determined because he has to meet a lot of unpleasant acquaintances. Leela looks at the guy intently, and then abruptly breaks away from the place and runs to him. The mother calls out to her daughter, but Leela does not listen to her and runs on. Leela doesn't want to let the guy go just like that because he saved her in the village. Leela runs straight to the guy. A blonde girl watches all this through a magic ball. She sees that Abel is alive and is not very happy. She thought he was still turned to stone and just standing in the middle of a huge field. The girl sat on the throne and held several people on chains. She smiled rapaciously and decided that Abel would become her next toy. She can't just let go of an old acquaintance. Abel managed to protect Layla's village from the orc army. He wasn't going to do something like this, but circumstances forced him to spend time saving the villagers. But the most important thing is that Abel managed to take revenge on one of the group of heroes, Gordon, one of the most unpleasant dwarves he had ever met in his entire life. The guy did not feel sorry for the dwarf. He believed that Gordon deserved his fate. Now the guy needs to find the others. He was already on his way to the next target. Gordon told him enough information about the other heroes that Abel would have to get even with. The sun was shining outside. The guy was walking along a sunny path, which was located right next to the lake in general. It was very calm and peaceful outside, so the guy just walked forward. Abel suddenly heard some sounds behind him. Leela was running after him, shouting at the guy, demanding that he stopped. The girl was out of breath and tired, but she still caught up with the guy and tried to stop him. The guy looked at the girl and did not understand why she was running after him. After all, he saved Layla's village and the inhabitants. The girl should have stayed with her mother, not run off on another dangerous adventure. The guy turns around and stops the girl, runs up to Abel and kneels down with her hands to catch her breath. She says she was finally able to catch up with the guy. She already thought that she would not have time to catch up with him. Abel asks why the girl ran after him. Leela presses her hand to her chest and says that she will go with the guy. She looks resolutely on Abel and waits for his reactions. She will do everything so that the guy agrees to go with her. The guy looks at the girl in disbelief because he does not understand why she should follow him. After all, he adheres to his own goals, whereover Abel does not think that Leela can somehow help him in battle. Abel refuses, explaining that his journey will be very long and dangerous. The children have nothing to do on his journey. He believes that the girl will only get in the way and create problems. Abel shouts for the girl to go home, but Leela continues and responds with a shout. Refusing to lead, she stands her ground confidently. Leela tries to argue her presence and the guy's journey. The guy looks at Leela intently. He asks what happened to the girl, why she abruptly decided to go on the road with him. He says he took her home and that should have been enough. Leela is silent for a while, and then says that she felt that if she let the guy go, he would be alone for the rest of his life. She doesn't want the guy to be lonely because he saved her life and the lives of the villagers. Good girl takes the guy's hand and says she can't leave him. Abel looks at the girl again, dumbfounded. Leela passes the pendant to the guy and, pressing her hand to her chest, says that she must make sure that he will return to her mother. The guy remembers Sarah's worried look. The guy gets serious again, turns around and says that Leela can do whatever she wants. The girl at first just looks at the guy and then smiles and says that's exactly what she will do. Leela and Aden will make their way through the forest. They were climbing over rocks. At this moment, the girl decides to ask why they should climb the mountain. She was very tired after trying to catch up with the guy. And now she is tired because of the sharp uphill climb. Suddenly wolves appear at the very top. The girl gets scared, and the guy stops the wolves to her, grinning. The girl stands and cannot move from fear. She is waiting for the moment when the wolves attack. One of the wolves ran forward, growling and trying to get to the girl. Leela screamed in fear. She didn't know where to run because it wasn't so easy to get off the mountain or over. The wolf was very fast and agile. Abel managed to stand right in front of the girl and use the seal with the help of a spell. He turned the wolf into stone. All of them froze for a moment and then rushed to attack again. But the guy used the spell again and turned the rest of the wolves into stones. As a result, the predators did not have time to get to the girl. Once again, Leela is saved by Abel. The girl feels useless because she could not do anything during the attack of the wolves. Abel turns around and sees Leela, who was looking at the guy with horror. Then the guy used another spell on the wolves. At that moment, the girl screamed and ran away from fright. The guy continued to use the petrification spell on the wolves, while the girl ran from side to side screaming and fear. The guy watched as the girl ran away from a small monster that looked like a bird. But Abel couldn't help Leela for a while as he had to deal with the rest of the monsters and animals they encountered along the way. Therefore, the girl spent most of the time just running screaming. In the late afternoon, when it was already dark, Leela and Abel decided to make a halt. They came to a small clearing where they could sit comfortably and rest for a while. Abel helped light the fire. They both sat down right next to the fire, which warmed them and illuminated the clearing. The girl and the guy just basked in silence around the campfire. For a while, Leela was sitting on a log and looked very upset. She considered herself useless. Abel tried to calm the girl down. He says he doesn't need another person to fight anyway. He is confident that he is able to cope with everything himself. The girl howls in resignation. That's not what she wanted to hear. The guy lowers his head and, closing his eyes, says that it would be better for the girl to return to the village. Since after all, the journey will not be easy and dangerous, she could get hurt. The girl lowers her head and thinks. Then she abruptly raises her head and smiles because she comes up with an idea that can simplify their journey. The girl abruptly becomes joyful. She puts her hand to her chest and, smiling, says that Abel could teach her magic, then she wouldn't have stopped him from fighting monsters. I might even be able to help with something. The guy did not share the girl's delight. He looked at the girl with an unimpressed look and said that he did not want to do something so dreary, especially during their joint journey. Leela takes the guy by the hand and says that if the guy teaches her magic, she will still be able to bring some benefit during the fight. She thinks she can at least protect the guy while in the rear. Leela is confused for a moment but still asks the guy about it. After much persuasion, Abel still agrees to become the girl's teacher. He will teach her magic. He has no idea how he will do it, but he will be able to teach her basic skills. The girl thinks the guy and jumps with delight. The guy just sighs with fatigue. He didn't expect that he would have to train someone else during the journey. They will consider it an additional headache. Then the guy decides to say what really seems strange to him is that Leela asked him to become a teacher. Leela says she will try her best, she's determined. But the guy admits that Leela's enthusiasm bribed him. Still, he has thoughts that Leela's training can bring some positive results. Abel gets up from his seat and ends their conversation by putting out the fire. They decided to go to bed to get enough sleep before a hard day. Abel and Leela lay down on sleeping bags and fall asleep. Since their last conversation, Abel has been teaching Leela magic while looking for members of the hero group. The girl was ready to follow the guy and obey him and everything. The guy was not particularly unimpressed, but still continued his journey with a new companion. While the guy and the girl were walking along the road, Abel says that Leela still has not awakened a unique skill, so he suggests starting with the basics. The guy stops and is about to show something to the girl. Abel has a flame in his hand, and he talks about how magic power is energy straight from the human body. He moves his hand and shows that he can safely hold the flame. The guy adds and says that emotions can both increase and decrease the stock of magical power, and especially bright emotions can be difficult to control magic. The girl listens attentively to the guy and looks at the flame that is in his hand. Abel at this time says that first they need to see how the girl can control magic in a calm state. Abel passes the flame to the girl. She tries to launch a fireball to the side. The girl is straining very hard, but nothing works out for her. Then she gets scared and tries to remove the flame from her hands. Abel continued the girl's education. He believed that the girl had no talent for magic at all. He thinks that in this case, she will not soon be of any use in battle, but still, he hoped that Leela would learn something. Abel and Leela approached the city, which was located near the sea. The guy stopped and began to look around. Leela was standing next to him trying to catch her breath. It was hard for her to be in constant motion. The guy and the girl reached the eastern coastal city, the port of Largo. There were 2-story stone houses and various counters in the city. The city was quiet and deserted. Abel and Layla walked through the streets of the city. The girl was constantly looking around. They didn't meet any on the way. The city was empty. There was no one in sight in the houses as well as on the streets. The guy looked towards the sea and saw a boat that was tied up. He told the girl that there really was no one in the city, despite the fact that Port Largo should be a very busy city. Layla began to tell that even before her birth, a terrible catastrophe had occurred in the city because of the army of the Demon King. People no longer came to the city because they were very much afraid. The guy was inspecting the counters. He saw a teddy bear under one of the counters. The guy came up, got down, and picked up a toe. He saw the blood on the toe. It seemed to him something terrible. He couldn't imagine what had happened in the city. The guy squeezed the toe harder and began to grind his teeth with tension. Layla noticed the guy's tension and tried to call out to him to find out if everything was okay with the guy. She was worried about the guy. Layla didn't fully understand Abel's purpose. She also didn't understand what the guy was thinking. She didn't know about his past and she met him just recently. She would like to get to know the guy better so that they could become real partners. Abel, without turning around, says that they need to explore the city. The girl did not resist and followed the guy. They walked through the streets and examined everything that met them on the way. The guy was walking and thinking that the city was empty. He no longer hoped that they would be able to find something or, for example, meet someone. The guy assumed that the city had become empty and deserted due to the attack of monsters. Suddenly, a blonde girl came around the corner with a huge basket of food. Abel and the girl looked at each other in disbelief. He went on like that for a while until he completely saw the girl. Then the guy opened his eyes, eyed and shocked because he recognized the girl as a member of a group of heroes. Layla looked attentively at the girl who was standing with a basket in her hands. Then the guy called her rank and named White Magician Lanoa. Lanoa was at a loss. She could only say the guy's name. Then she threw up her hands, dropping the basket of food, and ran up to the guy, clinging to him and begging him to forgive her. Layla opened her mouth in surprise, and Abel looked gloomily at the girl and again could not say anything. He was thinking about what he had to do now. The blonde girl pressed her hand to her chest and apologized to Abel for leaving him. Then she showed with all her appearance that she regretted that she ran away with the other heroes. Layla looked at the girl for a long time and tried to figure out who she was. She assumed that Lanoa was a former member of the hero group. The girl looked beautiful and strong. Layla notices Lanoa has pointed ears. She assumes that the girl is an elf. This is the first time Layla has seen such a thing. Elves in general are very rare, so Layla thinks she's lucky. Layla also draws attention to the smooth hair of the girl. It seems to her that this is the most beautiful girl she has ever seen. The girl had blonde wavy hair that streamed down her back. Then Layla screamed sharply, calling out to Abel. The guy folds the seal and is about to use the petrification again. Abel is weary and shouts that the elf should not dare to touch him. Lanoa falls to the ground and tries to crawl away from the guy. She is very much afraid of the guy. Abel at this time is going to make the girl petrify. That's why he came to the city. Layla runs up to Abel and tries to stop the guy. Layla holds the guy by the shoulder for a while, but when she realizes that he is determined, she decided to try to talk to him. Layla asks the guy to calm down. The girl tells Abel to pay attention to the fact that Lanoa is crying and apologizing. She says Lanoa is in a terrible state, so we shouldn't touch her. Suddenly, someone shouts at the guy and asks him to stop. A lot of strangers took to the streets who looked at the guy with contempt. Layla understands that these are residents of the coastal city. They all came out with the intention of protecting their mistress, so they were hostile to Abel. There were many other residents standing next to her. All of them stood up for their mistress and were ready to fight. One of the residents asked Abel to stop the violence. He asked what Mrs. Lanoa had done to Abel, why he wanted to harm her. They were going to protect their mistress with their lives. Layla falls into a stupor and the guy looks gloomily at everyone gather and Lanoa. One of the residents begins to talk about how they are all hiding deeper in the city not far from the market, and Mrs. Lanoa protects them from monsters that attack the city from time to time. Another resident confirms the guy's words and adds that Lanoa is the goddess protecting their city. It is she who saves all the inhabitants from the formidable monsters of the Demon King. All the residents begin to approach Abel and Leela and ask them not to touch Mrs. Lanoa. They were serious because Abel had scared their mistress a little but came up to Abel and started banging on him with his fists with tears in his eyes. He says he won't let his sister get hurt. Even the child stood up for Lanoa. Lanoa stops everyone. She presses her hand to her chest and says that Abel is her former comrade. Lanoa admits that she treated the guy terribly. She says that the guy became so angry because he was treated badly. She admits her guilt and tells a whole truth. Lanoa bows her head and addressing Abel says that all her life she regretted the deeds of the past. She had behaved terribly in the past, succumbing to the mood of the company she was in. Lanoa says she understands that she cannot ask Abel for anything, but she still wants to atone for the sins of the past. She asks the guy to give her another chance. The girl waits for the guy's answer without raising her head. Leela is silent for a while and then tells Abel Lanoa it doesn't seem like a bad person to her. Although the girl sees her for the first time, she still has only a positive impression of Lanoa. She also adds that the locals are of the same opinion, they adore their mistress and are ready to stand up for her. Leela says that this is a strong enough argument to spare Lanoa. Abel is very angry, but still decides to spare Lanoa. You listens to Leela and retreats. For a while he thinks he will think about his decision regarding Lanoa's revenge. After all, evening is coming. All residents gather on the street. They approached the counters and covered them with different cloths and then put dishes with delicious food. Since it was already night, residents lit lanterns that beautifully illuminated the streets. A cozy atmosphere was created. Residents also played various musical instruments. Many guys danced with girls to cheerful and rhythmic music. People came up to the tables and looked at how a man expertly butchered a huge fish. Lanoa is very happy about the holiday. Leela sits and eats delicious food. Rejoicing Abel is nowhere to be seen. The guy felt some kind of trick, so he hid while all the residents were just having fun at the festival. Lanoa says she needs to step away for a couple of minutes to bring some more delicious food. Leela thanks the girl for the treats. Leela has not eaten anything so delicious for a very long time. Lanoa smiles and goes to the side to bring food. Lanoa is walking down the alley. At some point she is grabbed by the hand. The girl gets scared and does not have time to react, so she is immediately pushed closer to the wall to press and immobilize. It turns out to be Abel. He pushes Lanoa against the wall and says that he did not believe in her stupid performance. He still feels the catch, so he can't believe that the girl has changed so dramatically or realized the meanness of her actions. Lanoa looks at the guy and says that after 20 years Abel has not changed despite the fact that he spent all these years in stone. She says he still has the same cute face. The girl was grinning while the guy squeezed her hands harder. Abel stares at the girl and says that she hasn't changed either. He says that the changes are not noticeable since the girl is an elf. He claims that she hasn't changed inside either. He senses her deceptive nature. Abel looks gloomily at the girl and says that he knows her true face. He is sure that she is a witch who pretends to be an elf. The girl looks intently at the guy. Lanoa recalled how 20 years ago she allowed herself to use Abel for her own purposes. She used him, but she didn't mock him like all the other heroes. When the guy was serving the girl, he was constantly engaged in physical labor. Once the guy tried to catch his breath while driving a carriage with a girl. The elf demanded that Abel move faster. She said he should get ready. The guy was pulling a huge carriage on the seats of which there was an elf with a fan. She sat and looked at the guy while he pulled the carriage with all his might. It was very hard for him. Suddenly Stark looked out of the carriage window, who began to mock the guy. He says that Lanoa is a storehouse of brilliant ideas. The girl winks and says that she likes this. The girl blushes when she remembers that everyone played with insects as a child. She really enjoys playing cruel games with them. The girl says that when she looks at a table she remembers those very insects. They are very similar. The girl rises from the seat to takes out her staff and pointing it at the guy demands that he move faster. Abel gets hit by magic and screams in pain but still continues to pull the carriage with the heroes. The guy was exhausted after the blow. It was even harder for him to drag a carriage with heroes who constantly mocked him. They just sat inside the carriage and waited for the guy to take them to their destination. Closer to sunset, the heroes decided to stop and make a halt. Lanoa and Stark were laughing at Abel. They were pleased to see how the guy was straining while they were doing nothing. Abel decides to go to a nearby mine During the stop, he puts a handkerchief in the water and says that he has experienced another disgusting day. He wanted to go back, but suddenly he heard a sound coming from a nearby cave. The guy completely got up from his knees and walked towards the cave to see what kind of sounds were being heard. He sees Lanoa and Stark. Lanoa asks if they will really go to the southern dungeon the next day. She says that there are a lot of monsters and insects there which the girl is afraid of. Abel falls into a stupor. While watching all this, he can't move, so he keeps looking. Lanoa leans over to Stark and suggests that he go to the casino. She assures him that if the guy agrees, she will do something nice for him. Stark blushes and agrees. He asks what they will do. As soon as Abel realized what was going on, he woke up and ran to the exit of the cave. Then he thought that Lanoa had feelings for Stark, but she treated the others the same way. One day a guy was walking around the city and noticed Lanoa standing in an alley with Gordon. The girl was telling him something and the guy was laughing and rubbing the back of his head. At that moment, the guy noticed how the girl started flirting with the guy. He realized that Lanoa was just seducing everyone to achieve her goals. She manipulated people and used them the way she wanted. The guy remembers how stunned he looked at the girl then, when he found out the truth. He was just terrified. All the heroes were terrible people who used other people for their own purposes. And Lanoa was no exception. The guy understood that the girl controlled all the characters being behind the scenes. She used every man on their team. Lanoa played with the heroes. And when they got bored, she just didn't pay attention to them anymore. Abel was sure that Lanoa was only a spider in a woman's body. Abel was very angry. She shouted at the girl and asked what kind of performance she had arranged. He asks if the girl really thought the guy would believe her. Abel is sure that the villagers have fallen under the influence of Lanoa. According to him, the girl is simply manipulating all residents. The guy asks if the girl has really become a spiritualist. Lanoa looked worried. She asked the guy to stop and tried to say something. Lanoa says Abel can say whatever he wants about her, but he has to say something bad about the villagers. They are dear to the girl. She is still trying to convince the guy that she's changed. Lanoa sharply raised her voice and crying says that the truth is trying to atone for sins. She explains this by the fact that it was in this coastal city that she was once rescued. The girl remembers the day, and they ran away from the Demon King. Together with the heroes, she separated from the group and wandered alone through the wastelands. During her journey, the girl realized that the Demon King had taken over the world. Lanoa during his lonely journey had to hide in corners in fear in order to survive. The girl says that no one even wanted to give her food. Everyone chased her away. At that time, the girl was experiencing negative feelings. She had never felt anything like this before. At some point, the girl reached her limit. She came to this coastal town and fell off her feet. The girl just lay in the mud for a long time. It seemed to her that the end had come. The girl did not give up hope and stretched out her hands to the residents, begging them to give her water or food. All the residents looked at her dumbfounded. She realized that no one would help her in this city either. She believed that now a new rule prevailed in their world, everyone for himself. Lanoa believed that the losing group did not deserve either water or food. Then someone suddenly sat down right in front of the girl and put a plate with a piece of bread. Lanoa stared dumbfounded at the bun, then at the residents of the coastal city. Lanoa asked why the residents decided to help her. The man who handed her a piece of bread smiled, then said that at the moment the girl needed food more. He asked if it was true. The girl was amazed by the kindness of the residents. She did not understand why the residents gave her food which they themselves really needed. They were very difficult times. People lived unhappily precisely because of the loss of the heroes. The girl opened her mouth wide, wondering why people were so kind to her. And then I made the first cut and cried. It was then that Lanoa finally realized what a terrible elf she had been all along. She did terrible things that made others suffer. Abel was one of those people. Since then, Lanoa has settled in the coastal town. She tried to atone for her sins by helping people with her magic. The girl finished her story and informed Abel that she wanted the guy to give her another chance. She wants to prove that she has really changed, especially since so many years have. The girl folds the seal and a tray with 2 glasses appears in her hands. She smiles and asks Abel to believe her. The girl looks innocent, as if she has never mocked the guy standing in front of her. Abel silently looked at Lanoa and the glasses that she offered. He still found it hard to believe in the girl's sincerity. He looks at his reflection in the glass for a while, but then decides to give Lanoa another chance. Abel raises a glass with a drink. Lanoa repeats after him. He raises his glass and smiling says that in that case they need to drink to their meeting. Leela at this time was lying on her hands, which were folded on the table. Abel take a sip. Leela was unconscious. She began to come to her senses and open her eyes. A girl who is in some strange cold room. She was lying on the floor. All this time the girl could not see because of the darkness. The girl began to look around. She tried to remember what had happened. Her last memory was of having fun in Mrs. Lanoa's party. She remembers how the girl said she would go for food. After that they did not see each other. She is trying to figure out how she ended up in a closed room on the floor. She doesn't remember anything suspicious at the celebration. Everyone was friendly at the party. Over time the girl's eyes began to get used to the darkness. She noticed the cage from which huge paws with claws were showing. She recoiled abruptly as she was frightened. There was not an animal in the cage, but a monster. The girl was scared. The girl got up from the ground and looked around. There were cages everywhere from which frightening sounds were heard. Someone was asking for help. Someone was growling. Apparently, there were not only monsters in the cages. The girl looked around and saw a huge variety of creatures that were sitting in cages tied with chains. She couldn't figure out how she ended up in the room with them. The girl is shocked. She was trying to figure out what was going on and what kind of place it was. She didn't understand who needed to lock people in monsters in cages. They were all growling or yelling for release. The girl heard a sound behind her. She turned around and saw Mrs. Lanoa. She just stood in front of the girl and didn't say anything. She looked with disdain at the girl who was looking around as if it wasn't the friendly girl they met in the city. Leela ran to Mrs. Lanoa to find out where they were. She asked if they had been abducted. The girl assumed that Lanoa, who was able to get out of the cage with the help of magic and find Leela, but the girl was wrong. Lanoa said nothing. She just stood there and said nothing. Leela noticed the girl's gloomy look and tried to call out to her again. At some point the girl stopped trying to reach Lanoa and took a few steps back. Lanoa smiled and laughed out loud, sharply putting her hand to her face. She looked mockingly at the girl who did not understand anything. Lanoa asked if the girl really didn't understand anything yet. Leela looked at her in horror. She hoped that Lanoa had changed, but she remained the same arrogant person. All this time, Lanoa was pretending in order to learn Abel and Leela. Lanoa struck the ground with her staff and the seal was formed near her from which a cross with Abel tied to it rose. Leela screamed. She saw that the guy was unconscious and just hanging with his head hanging down. Lanoa remembers her special potion, which she gave the guy. She says that Abel has not woken up for 3 days. Judging by the girl's words, Abel will be unconscious for a long time. The guy didn't react in any way. Lanoa smiled and said, "It was very easy to control a man. She was just pretending to be weak to be believed. So she has been doing all her adult life. She was just manipulating everyone." Layla remembers residents who said only good things about their mistress. They were all ready to defend Lanoa. This seems strange to her because the residents looked quite sincere. Leela can't believe that all of Lanoa's apologies in the town square were just lies and pretense, but it really was one big performance that was staged in order to lure Abel and Leela. Leela screamed. She asked the girl what it all meant. She reminds her that Lanoa said she was getting better. She believed her because Lanoa had told her story. Lanoa grins and says that to some extent she has really improved. She spreads her arms to the sides and says that now she will treat Abel even worse than before. The girl starts laughing even louder. She says that Abel has always been useless and she has never felt the urge to repent. She didn't care about the guy until he left the stone shell in which he was imprisoned. Leela is shocked. She remembers again the residents in the square who spoke very tenderly about their mistress Lanoa. She says everyone loved the girl. She remembers Abel who cried because he was afraid that Lanoa would be harmed. Leela raises her head and looking at the girl asks if she really made all the residents just play along. She can't believe it. All this time, Abel was right that Lanoa hadn't changed. Lanoa says Leela finally understood. Lanoa tells how she subdued all the inhabitants with her magic. Now they all obey her implicitly and carry out all her orders. It was very simple with magic. Lanoa puts her hand to her face and says she needs a lot of vitality to maintain her beauty. She cares very much about her appearance because it is with her health that she achieves her goals. Lanoa says that taking the life force from only one person is too difficult. Therefore, she decided to command the whole city in order to immediately have access to a huge number of people with vitality. Lanoa says that men are the easiest to subdue with magic, especially till when they are fascinated by the beauty of a girl. All of them are conducted only on appearance, and Lanoa herself is quite beautiful. Lanoa takes off her raincoat and says that this coastal city has been her testing ground from the very beginning. She constantly tested her magic on the inhabitants and monsters of this city. After some time, this city has become an ideal place where she can pursue her hobby. Leela looks with horror at the girl behind whom monsters appear. She turns to her servants and says, "It's time to have fun." The monster is roared with delight. One of the monsters ran right after Leela. He growled furiously and raised his hands, and the girl ran, turning around and shouting that it was all her fault. It was she who trusted Lanoa. Leela remembers that Abel had doubts from the very beginning. Leela fell to the floor and screamed in pain. At that moment, a huge monster hand reached out for her, which was about to grab her. One of the monsters grabs Leela and laughs. The girl screams and tries to break free from the grip, but she can do it because the monster squeezes her body very hard. He has a huge paw. Lanoa blushed inside. She says she loves it when people scream. The girl is very strange and cruel. She liked to see people suffer. She also supported the abuse. Leela turned around and, gathering all her strength, directed a small flame towards Lanoa, but the flame was very weak, so it did not reach and went out. Her magic was still very weak. Lanoa started laughing at the girl and asking what she had just tried to do. A monster starts shaking Leela in his arms. He squeezed her body harder, causing Leela to groan in pain. She was still trying to break free from the monster's steel grip. Lanoa tells how she saw through her magic ball how Abel was able to free himself from the stone captivity. She hadn't seen him for 20 years, so she didn't even think that he would be able to do something like this. Lanoa smiles and says that she is very glad that the guy was able to free himself from captivity. And he says that if the girl had not stood up for her, then perhaps Abel would not have believed in the stage performance. Leela looks at the girl again with horror and grits her teeth. She understands that she acted very stupidly. She shouldn't have listened to Abel after all, since he had known Lanoa for a sufficient amount of time. Lanoa sighs. She says she is absolutely thrilled. Then Lanoa releases all his magical energy and, smiling, wishes his monster has a pleasant appetite. Lanoa approaches the girl and bends over to her while Leela screams in horror. She enjoys every last second of her sacrifice. She blows magic smoke right into the girl's face. After that, the girl notices that her strength is leaving her. She remembers Abel and asks him for salvation. She didn't expect things to turn out this way, but now she is powerless, so she needs Abel's help. Leela remembers how the guy protected her during the trip. Whatever monster it was, Abel always came to the rescue. He never threw her to the monsters. Leela thinks that she is only asking Abel for help. When she saw his sad face, she decided to save him. She thought she could help him somehow, if not by magic men, at least by support. Then he resolutely says that he does not want to be a ballast for Abel. She wants to be the one to cover for the guy. She wants to be his equal. She is going to fight back in order to continue the journey with the guy. Leela remembers the guy's advice that magic needs to be controlled. She needs to calm down. The most important thing is to focus on the magic inside the body. Leela closes her eyes and thinks about what Abel taught her, so she has to protect herself. Even just cook it. The moment has come when she can stand up for herself and help the guy. Leela raises her head and looks resolutely at Lanoa. She pulls her hand to the side and screams. Her hand starts to glow. Leela looks at Lanoa while she was confused by the girl's actions. Leela sharply strikes Lanoa right in the face. Lanoa does not have time to react to the blow and dodge. She gets angry. After the blow, a huge red hand mark appears on her cheek. Lanoa flies away and lands on the ground. For a while she couldn't get up and just lay there until the monsters came up and tried to help her mistress get up from the floor. But this time one of the monsters reaches out with his hand to Leela to grab her, and the girl is trying to escape at this time. She manages to escape from the monster at a sufficient distance so that she is not captured. Lanoa was very angry. The monsters are still coming up to their mistress and trying to help her get up. Meanwhile, Leela was sitting on the ground and trying to catch her breath after her attack and escape from the monster. Lanoa speaks negatively about the girl. She screams all sorts of curses and looks angrily at the girl who struck her. She won't forgive her for the blow, especially now she's not going to spare her. Lanoa tried to get to her feet leaning on her staff. She was asking how the girl dared to strike her beautiful face. She says that now she will definitely not leave the girl alive. Lanoa used her staff to create a seal over herself and sent a huge magic beam directly towards Leela, demanding that the girl say goodbye to life. She was sure that the girl had come to an end. Leela stared at the huge magic beam with wide eyes and couldn't move to try to escape. She thought that this was really her end because she had nowhere to run and Abel would not help her. Suddenly, he uttered the word decree and thereby deciphering another spell. Abel is released from prison and runs to Leela to save her. The guy manages to grab the girl right before the magic ray reaches her. Lanoa looks at Abel and Leela with his mouth open and surprise. The guy praises the girl for being able to buy time for him. He saw how the girl was able to resist the witch. During this time, Abel managed to free himself and master a new spell. He wasn't going to leave Leela in the lurch. He just needed time to decipher a new spell and release. Leela also looks at the guy in shock while he says that he managed to complete the decryption. The guy kneels right in front of the girl and putting his hand on her shoulder says that she did a great job. The guy turns around, kneads his hands and tells Leela to leave everything else to him. He is determined to win the battle with Lanoa. Lanoa stood in front of the guy holding her staff with both hands. The guy was covering Leela with his back and says it's time for them to end all this. He swears, calling Lanoa a witch. Leela couldn't recognize the guy. She stood in a stupor and just watched the guy deal with the monsters that get in his way. The guy threw up his hands and folded the seal. Lanoa screams, asking how Abel was able to regain consciousness. If he didn't wake up for 3 days, she prepared a very strong potion that was supposed to put the guy into a long sleep. The guy looks at the girl seriously and remembers that meeting in the alley when he decided to give the girl a chance. He thought for a long time what to do. He considered the possibility that the girl had really changed, but still suspicions remained. He drank the potion and fell to the ground unconscious. Lanoa was looking at him with a smile at the time because her plan had worked. She thought the guy believed her. Now she could put him in chains. When the guy fell to the ground unconscious, he again found himself right in front of a huge screen with inscriptions. He knew that Lanoa was deceiving him, so he came up with a new plan of action. The guy began to get closer to the screen. He was considering a new spell. Abel had assumed that his formula would be quite complicated, but he did not expect that much. It will take him a very long time to decipher. Abel tells Lanoa that he knew the girl would cheat on him. He specially drank the magic potion that the girl offered him. He wanted to study with the help of decoding. Lanoa chuckles and glares at Abel. She was very angry, so she decided not to wait with the attack. Abel turned to Leela and called out to her. He asked the girl to stand behind him. The girl obeys and starts moving. She did everything she could, so now she won't bother the guy. All the monsters in Lanoa are looking at Abel going to deal with him. Lanoa is furious. She promises that she will not let the guy leave alive. No one had ever made her so angry. The girl shouts her monster command so that they grab Abel. The monsters immediately obey and take off, stretching their arms forward. The guy folds the seal and uses a spell on the monsters. The monsters stopped as they begin to freeze. Their body was covered with a stone shell. It will use petrification over and over again. Abel says he doesn't care that the monsters were human. He demands that they do not interfere with him. He has a goal to defeat and then take revenge on Lanoa. Therefore, he will not spare those who stand in his way. The monsters couldn't move as the stone shell covered their body. They could only growl before turning completely into stone, but there were more and more of them. Abel was being watched by a creature with ears that was sitting in a cage, was staring open mouth at the guy who was overpowering the monsters. The creature crawled closer to the bars of the cage to get a better look at the guy. The monster has continued to attack the guide, but he still folded the seal and used the spell petrification. All the monsters turned to stone and froze forever. Monsters couldn't resist a guy wielding a powerful spell. At that moment, Lanoa appeared behind Abel. She was going to attack him from behind. While he wasn't looking, the girl didn't care if it was an honest victory or not. She just wanted to deal with the guy as soon as possible. The girl recognizes the power of the decoding skill. She thinks that the guy can calmly dispel any magic and then use it. Lanoa thinks that no matter how strong Abel is, he will not be able to repel an attack that he does not see. She loaded her magic staff and pointed it towards Abel to attack. The guy folds the seal and does not have time to turn around to repel the attack. Blood splashes. The guy opens his eyes wide. He can't understand what just happened, but he feels pain in his back. Leela closes her mouth in shock at this time. She looks at the guy with horror. She sees the arrow hit right in the guy's back. The girl wants to help the guy but can't even budge. Lanoa looks at Abel and smiles rapaciously. She hubs her staff and asks what the guy has to say about her magic. She says that she uses transparent magic, the invisible arrow. Lanoa continues and says that the guy was hit by a magic arrow that cannot be seen until it reaches the target. Abel couldn't see or hear her. Abel falls to his knees because of the pain. He feels like an arrow has hit him in the back, but he didn't have time to react and repel the attack. Lanoa says he lost. She gave her monster as a command to finish off the guy. One of the monsters obeys the command and swings to deliver the final blow to Abel. Lanoa says Abel lost because he was too confident in his strength. Leela shouts at Abel to do something. She does not believe that he really will not have time to take any measures and avoid a blow. Abel smiles and asks if Lanoa is really sure that he lost. The guy waves his hand, lifting the cloak, and seals appear around his body. Lanoa looks at the guy angrily. Leela looks at the guy with adoration. She was surprised when she saw that there was a magic circle under the cloak. The guy was protected from the very beginning. Lanoa's arrow did nothing to Abel. He was still alive and had not received any injuries. He had prepared himself in advance for just such an occasion, as he knew what Lanoa was capable of. Lanoa looks at the guy in shock. She couldn't believe what was happening. She was sure that she had defeated Abel because the attack was strong and unexpected. But still, she made a miscalculation. Abel raises his hand at this time and says that even though Lanoa is a terrible person, she is still a strong sorceress from the group of heroes. Abel knew what the girl was capable of, so he prepared in advance. Lanoa glares at the guy and thinks it's all nonsense. She decides to continue the battle and try to hit the guy again. The girl wonders if the guy really activated the decryption for his whole body. She looked at him carefully and tried to come up with a new strategy to win for sure. The girl falls to her knees. She realizes that she cannot defeat a guy with such a skill. She wasn't prepared for such a strong opponent. Moreover, Lanoa did not expect that Abel had become so strong. Lanoa can only use magic attacks. She is once again convinced of her impotence. Her magic attacks will not be able to do anything to the guy, so she still accepts the feat. Lanoa was on her knees right in front of Abel, pressed against the guy's leg, and began to ask him for forgiveness. She tried to convince him that she was just stupid. The girl admitted that she was wrong. It was another manipulation. Lanoa offers the guy a deal. If he spares her life, she will do whatever the guy wants. She promises that she will be obedient and will never manipulate anyone again. Lanoa blushes and looks straight at the guy with her piercing eyes. She says the truth will do anything. The guy is silent for a while, and then just puts his hand on the girl's shoulder. Lanoa is at a loss. She calls out to the guy again, trying to get an answer from him. But Abel is silent for a long time, and just looks at her and then grins. Abel tells her that she has to give up. He assures her that it's over. Lanoa has no need to fight anymore, since she has lost and can't do anything to Abel. The guy uses the spell petrification, as a result of which the girl's shoulder is covered with a stone shell. She feels a heaviness in her shoulder. The girl realized that only Abel could stop the spell now. The guy says no one else will believe Lanoa. Abel says that the girl herself refused her last chance. Lanoa immediately remembers the residents who tried to help her selflessly. Abel says that in fact, he's very happy that she has changed. The girl started screaming. She asked the guy not to do it. She begged him, but Abel wouldn't listen to her. Abel continues and says that ever since they went on a trip, even then 20 years ago, the guy hated her. The guy said this, dropping closer to the girl's face. Lanoa screamed sharply. She asked the guy not to do it. Her hands were covered with a stone shell and Lanoa kept screaming. She was terrified that her beauty was suffering. Then the girl thought about it and realized that if she turned into stone, then her beauty would be eternal. This is exactly what she has wanted all her life, thus her dream will come true. The girl started laughing madly and then a second later froze, turning into a stone statue. It looked very creepy, as the girl was pulling her hand up and laughing madly. The guy looked at her and turned around saying that she was not pretty at all. Abel approached Leela and said it was time for them to leave. The guy didn't want to linger in such a place anymore. Leela and Abel decided to continue their journey. At this time, many residents have already regained consciousness. They stood and blinked often as if they were coming out of a long sleep. All the townspeople who became monsters have regained their human form. They went out to the square and stood in perplexity because they could not remember what had happened to them all this time, all thanks to Abel. Abel suddenly stopped and apologized to Leela. The girl was alarmed. She didn't understand why the guy was asking her for forgiveness. She was trying to figure out what made the guy apologize. Abel says that in his plan, he did not take into account Leela's safety because the most important thing for him is revenge. He admits that revenge will remain one of the priorities, but still says that the girl's safety is also very important to him. Then the guy continues and says that even at the same time the girl is worried about him. He remembers that Leela tried to protect her. Leela, his eyes widened. She didn't expect to hear something like that from a guy. Abel rarely said something like that. Therefore, the girl greatly appreciated such conversations were over. She really wanted to help the guy. She can't leave him alone. Abel sighs and says that he has decided something for himself. Suddenly Leela hears a sound. The girl and the guy turn their gazes to the bushes where the sound was coming from. They wait for a while trying to figure out what was making noise. Someone jumped out of the bushes and shouted that he had found it. It was a strange girl with ears who jumped out. She raised her hands and addressing Abel as the Demon King said that she had seen his battle. The girl falls to her knees and bends down in front of the guy. She says she wants to be Abel's right-hand man. She wants to obey him and follow all the commands that he will give. The girl wants to accompany the future Demon King. Abel looks gloomily at Galgo. Leela doesn't understand how the creature could mistake Abel for the Demon King. She wonders what the girl is saying. Galgo kept talking about Abel becoming the Demon King. Galgo presses his head against the guy and rubs against his leg. They will tries to understand what the creature is talking about. He cannot believe that he will one day become a Demon King. As Galgo says, the guy just wanted to take revenge on his abusers. Leela thinks that a beastman girl named Galgo appeared very unexpectedly. It seems to her that Galgo seems to worship Abel. Leela blushed at these thoughts. She didn't like to think about it. Abel tried to stop Galgo. She raised her head and listened attentively to him. The guy asked why Galgo decided that he was the Demon King. He doesn't understand why he needs his right hand. Leela looks at Galgo in disbelief. She is waiting for the girl's answer, since she herself does not fully understand what she needs and why she got involved in their journey. They weren't G. Galgo falls to his knees again. She bows down to the guy and asks for forgiveness from her master. She says she's to blame for not explaining anything. Leela thinks that the girl likes to prostrate herself, as this is not the first time. It was very bright outside. Abel, Leela, and Galgo were still outside. They were all walking along the path together. Most of the way they were just silent as they were very tired after the battle. Galgo smiles and says that it is very nice to meet you. She says that she used to be in the army of the Demon King. She calls her name again, Galgo. The girl says that she is in search of a master to serve. Abel asks about the Demon King's army. Galgo rubs the back of her head and says she has been fired for a long time. She no longer obeys the current Demon King. She has nothing to do in general, so she wants to travel with them. Galgo said that she dreamed of joining the army of the Demon King, but she was kicked out when they realized she was half human. Only demons and monsters are accepted there. After the girl was kicked out, she traveled around the country until she was caught by a witch. She didn't expect the witch to be able to grab her, but Galgo couldn't resist the witch's huge number of monsters. Galgo was in the cage for a long time. At some point she almost despaired. Then she saw Abel, who used the spell petrification, which was used by the Demon King. The girl was looking at the guy at first. She was trying to figure out if it was really the Demon King. She opened her eyes wide when she saw the huge magical power of the guy. He was very strong. Galgo blushes and screams with the light when she remembers how she saw the guy and immediately realized that she was the next Demon King. The girl was sure that Abel would become famous, defeat the Demon King and take his place. Leela approaches the guy and leans over to whisper what she thinks. When Galgo saw how the guy defeated a member of the group of heroes, she thought that he was a villain. Leela clears her throat and says that Galgo misunderstood everything. The girl says that Abel is not going to become the Demon King and does not recruit people into his group. Galgo begins to get angry and cries out that she is talking nonsense. She addresses Leela as a servant and says that she has no right to speak ahead of the master. Leela screams, asking why she was mistaken for a servant. Galgo points his hand at the girl and asks if she really thinks that the beastman did not see how she received blows from the witch and could not cope with the monsters. She says that Leela was useless to Abel. Then Galgo comes closer to the girl and asks if there is such an option in which Leela did not want someone to interfere with their journey together. Leela is embarrassed and asks Galgo not to say anything like that. Galgo was going to attack Leela again with new questions. Leela turned around and asked Abel if he had anything to say. She asks if the guy will really take Galgo on a trip. Abel averted his gaze and remained silent. He stared intently at the floor as he understood that the answer would not suit the girl. Leela was shocked by his reaction, and Galgo smiled. Leela approached Abel and, clutching his cloak, began to ask if the guy understood her correctly. She wondered what kind of facial expression he had made. Leela realized that Abel probably didn't mind taking Galgo with him. At that moment, Abel didn't say anything because he always loved furry animals. The guy noticed the girl's ears and tail, which seemed cute to him. He was embarrassed when he started thinking about it. The fluffy tail and the ears of Galgo did not allow him to say no. The guy decided that they could use some extra help. Moreover, they have a long journey ahead of them. Galgo felt something sharply. She abruptly opened her eyes and moved away from the guy to the opposite side. It was as if she had foreseen something and immediately avoided it. Abel didn't understand what had happened. Suddenly, something landed behind him with a loud crash, something huge and inhuman. A huge amount of dust rose, which covered the entire view. Abel, Galgo and Leela turned around looking in shock in the direction of the crash. They were all trying to figure out what had happened. Dust was still flying in the air, so it was difficult to see the creature. A huge iron worm with yellow eyes appeared right in front of them. The whole company fell into a stupor. They had never seen anything like it before. The monster looked impressive. He was examining his opponents. Leela shouted that the worm looked very huge. She screamed, asking what kind of creature it was. The girl was very scared and could not even imagine how it would be able to cope with him. Galgo admired the creature. She shouted that it was an iron worm. It was he who very often interfered with the witch. Galgo says they need to deal with the worm as soon as possible. Abel looked at the girl in shock. He wonders if he thought she noticed the worm earlier. He was not for nothing that she moved away from the place where the worm landed. The girl at this time stood and opened her mouth wide in surprise. Abel folds the seal and points his hands at the worm. He decides that he has no time to think about it. Now the most important thing is the fight with the worm. He can create a huge number of problems. The guy used this spell. Suddenly, the iron worm starts attacking. Fables attacked and turned the worm into stone. He started towering over the guy and everyone else again. Abel stares at the worm and waits for its attack. The iron worm swings its lower body very hard and tries to hit a wall right while he and the others are not moving. Leela does not have time to react and the worm almost hits her, so Abel picks up the girl in his arms and runs away with her. Galgo immediately gets on all fours and runs after the guy with the girl. Leela turns around and asks how the iron worm was able to repel Abel's attack. She was shocked because Abel's attacks are very strong. In general, his decoding skill can help defeat any enemy. Galgo says that the iron worm was protected by a shell as strong as steel. He was protected, so it was difficult for him to deal damage. Such a shell needs to be pierced with something more serious and heavy. The iron worm catches up with the whole company and stands right in front of them. Abel, Galgo and Leela stopped. They needed to come up with a new escape plan if they wanted to survive. The guy looks closely at the iron worm. He decides to use the spell petrification. The guy folds the seal and is about to use a spell. He was practically using a spell, but he was interrupted by Galgo. Abel stops and opens his eyes wide. He sees how Galgo makes several jerks forward, jumps up and flies straight towards the iron worm to attack him. Galgo swings and strikes with his hand. After the impact, the worm's iron armor is covered with cracks and breaks into pieces. A loud crash heard. The worm falls on its side and can no longer attack. Leela and Abel look shocked at everything that is happening. One little girl was able to defeat a huge worm with one blow. They did not expect that Galgo could be so strong. Galgo smiles rapaciously and chuckles. She asks what the Demon King will say to that. The girl was very happy to participate in the battle after so many days of imprisonment in the witch's cage. Galgo stands right on top of the defeated iron creature and says that this is her real strength. She says she will be useful in the travels of Leela and Abel. She will be able to both be on the front line and attack and in the rear to defend. Abel grins darkly looking at Galgo. He thinks the girl's physical strength is really powerful. He thinks that she is very strong, that she is going to become his right hand. The guy decides that he can use the physical power and abilities of the girl. That will be useful to them in battle. Abel says the Galgo will go with them. After all, Galgo screams with joy and Leela asks Abel what it means. Abel continues and says that if Leela has a desire, then she can become stronger. In the late afternoon, Abel, Leela and Galgo passed the cave. Leela took out a bag of gold and started counting the coins. She thinks that there is very little money, and since there are only 3 of them now, their travel expenses will become even more. Leela sighs and says she think of something. They will need money, so most likely they will have to save, or they can take coins for the massacre of monsters. Galgo feels something. She raises her head, moves her ears and looks at Abel. Leela notices this and turns to the guy, calling out to him. Galgo feels that they are not alone on the path. The whole company stops abruptly. Apparently Abel also noticed that someone was following them. Abel asks the pursuers who they are. He says that he knows that someone is following them and demands that they show themselves. Suddenly, someone's voice is heard behind one of the caves, who says that she suspected that they were noticed. The guy turns around and sees the pursuers coming forward. A pink-haired girl in armor comes forward. Behind her stood knights in exactly the same armor. The girl presses her hand to her chest and begs for Abel to save their country. Abel looks at his pursuers with a question. You did not understand where these men in armor came from and what kind of protection they were asking for the country. But the girl looked very determined. She wasn't going to back down. Towards nightfall, a man in armor was sitting in one of the rooms of the fortress. He was very tense. The man's name was Aden, and he was one of a group of heroes. 20 years later, he became a knight. The man was sweating very much. He was standing alone in the room and seemed to be waiting for someone. That's why he was so worried. Abel, Galgo and Leela got into the carriage with the armored men. They drove in complete silence as everyone was uncomfortable. Galgo says he doesn't like carts. Leela asks the girl to shut up and says that they need to listen to new acquaintances. The pink-haired girl in armor presses her hand to her chest again and says that she is glad to meet. She calls her name and age. She says she is the captain of the Knights of the Claymore Kingdom. The age tells that they are currently traveling to the Claymore Kingdom. That's where her homeland is. The girl tells that their kingdom is still actively fighting with the Demon King. She came to find allies at the kingdom of Alkal or refused her. On the way home, Needs and the rest of the warriors witnessed the battle of Abel, Galgo and Leela with the Iron Worm. It was Leela who persuaded everyone to go with them. He just read her and says she wanted to thank Leela, Abel and Galgo from the bottom of her heart. She says that if the whole company helps them, then their war with the Demon King can finally end. Nate bends down and says that there won't be enough words to express his gratitude. Abel thinks that the girl is overreacting. She's too excited. He wonders how the girl hasn't been hit on the head with a shield yet. Galgo at this time began to look out of the window and admire the views. The aides walked over to her and tried to pull her back into the cart. She told the girl that she could fall out, so she asked her not to get out so much. Abel was tapping his knee with his finger. He said the guy was thinking that it would be better if he went in search of the next of the group of heroes. The guy remembers how Leela was delighted when Needs told her about the award. She persuaded the guy to take a short break from the main purpose of the trip. The guy could not refuse, looking at the girl's eyes full of delight. Abel thinks that Leela didn't even want to hear a refusal. She was already mentally spending the reward she had received. The girl at that moment was asking if they could help Neej in her kingdom. The guy thought about the fact that they really needed money, so he still agreed. He also remembers the girl's words that she has information about Stark can to other members of the hero group. The guy also found out that Gordon didn't know everything. People understood that they had a long journey ahead of them. They needed to prepare and stock up on money, as well as equipment, and 5 days later, the cart with Manhwa, Galgo, Abel and Leela arrived at the fortress. The whole company stared dumbfounded at the towers of Claymore Castle. The Galgo were amazed at the huge size of the kingdom. Galgo says he has never seen such a huge gate. Leela agrees and says that one can feel greatness at a glance. Leela lived in a small village, so she did not see something like this. Nade comes forward and says that first of all, she will introduce them to her teacher. She will let you know when he's ready. She says that Abel, Leela and Galgo can take a walk and look around for now. Galgo began to turn her head from side to side. Leela noticed this and decided to ask what happened to the girl. She was acting very strangely from the moment they entered the fortress. A man steps forward and greets Manhwa. The girl greets the man, calling him a teacher. They both begin to exchange news and the results of their journey. Abel fell into a stupor when he saw the teacher. The teacher also looked discouraged. The man wondered how Abel was able to get out of the stone captivity. He remembers exactly how the guy froze like a statue. Abel is one of the group of heroes. These notices the reaction of her teacher and Abel, so she turns to the guy and asks if they really know each other. She is interested to know why both have such a reaction. Abel suddenly rushed forward straight at the teacher, intending to attack him. The man screamed in fright. At that moment, Needs was right in front of him. She blocked the guy's blow with a shield. Abel didn't have time to use his spell, even though he had already folded the seal. Needs looks anxiously at the guy and asks what happened to him. She doesn't understand why the guy abruptly started attacking their teacher. Abel clocked because he was hampered by a shield. In order to strike, the guy jumps aside and thinks about how Nade could block her magic. Of this time, Nade asks the teacher if he is okay. Leela covered her mouth with her hand as she was in shock. She didn't want Abel to fight again. Galgo was delighted. She clenched her fists and shouted for Abel to continue attacking the man. Abel starts to get angry. He demands that Needs get out of the way and not interfere with him, since the teacher was one of the members of Aden's hero group. The guy said that he was traveling only to take revenge on his abusers. Nade holds out his hand and asks what it means. She asks why the guy would take revenge on her teacher and then asks the guy to calm down. She is trying to resolve the conflict so that there are no victims. Nade says that the teacher is an indispensable person for their kingdom. The girl tells that the teacher is the head of all the knights of their kingdom. He has a very important role to play. The man tries to say something, but Needs continues and says that he is the main military power of the claimo. It is he who leads all the troops and knights who defend the church. Lead gets into a fighting stance and claims that as long as she is alive, she will not let the teacher touch a finger. She is very determined because her teacher is an important person not only for herself, but also for the country. Abel stares at the man. The man looks away as if nothing had happened. Abel begins to get very angry if he does not accept that Aden behaves as if he did not mock him along with the rest of the heroes. He leaves with the teacher and says that she herself invited Abel, Leela and Galgo so they can spend the night in the fortress. Then they dads and says she should think again about asking Abel for help. She also asks that Abel not get into a fight with her teacher. Abel chuckles and says he'll listen to her. Leela calls out to Abel. She says the guy is bleeding, and then he asks if he's alright. She didn't expect that Abel could be hurt. The guy remembers how he got hit on the forehead with a shield. Abel watched the age and her teacher leave. He realized that the girl was very dangerous. She was able to repel his attack and protect her teacher, so the guy did not doubt her strength. Nade was standing in the corridor of the fortress right in front of her teacher. She wanted to talk to him after her long journey. They needed to discuss the results and figure out what to do next. Nade was apologizing to the teacher for the fact that the negotiations with Alcoa had failed. The man laughs and says that they always quarreled with Alcoa, so it was expected. He didn't scold the girl. The teacher says that he did not expect only that the girl would bring Abel. He asks how it happened that his student personally brought a friend of Aden. He hadn't seen him for 20 years, so he was very scared. The man grins and says that if it wasn't for an age, the guy would definitely hurt him. He chuckles nervously and Age notices it. The man tries to pretend that everything seems to be fine. Abel, Leela and Galgo were escorted inside the castle to one of the rooms. They immediately sat down at the table, which was covered with a huge amount of delicious food, and began to have dinner. They were very hungry after a long journey. The guy was very gloomy. He covered his face and thought that Needs was preventing him from taking revenge on his abusers. He has to do something because he has been going to this for a very long time. Moreover, he has already dealt with the first two offenders. Galgo was eating her food very quickly. Leela was telling Abel that he should calm down first. The teacher seemed to Leela too weak to be one of the group of heroes. She cannot believe that he is now in charge of the fortress troops. The girl also noticed how much the man was afraid of Abel. The guy presses his hand to his side. He lifts up the hem of his shirt, showing the scar that he left after the poker. He remembered well how the heroes treated him throughout their journey together. It seems unsurprising to the guy that the teacher seems weak to Leela, because among the whole group of heroes, he was the most cowardly. He wasn't violent, but he was easily led by other stronger heroes. The guy remembers how his hands were tied and his mouth was covered with a rag. At that moment, a young Aden was glaring at him. Angrily, Aden was as worried as they will himself because he had to fulfill Stark's demand. Stark stood aside and, grinning, asked what the guy was waiting for. He said it was simple. He tries to persuade the guy in a poker table, who was tied up on the floor with a poker. Aden's body was shaking with fear, as Stark assured him that if Aden failed, he would take his place. Aden was very scared. He couldn't disobey Stark. Most of all, he was afraid of being in Abel's place. Aden swung the poker, sharply shouting at the same time, and struck Abel. The guy held in pain. He couldn't resist or do anything with his wound, so he just lay on the floor and endured. Aden has always been just a pathetic subordinate of Stark. He did everything that those who are stronger will tell him on the whole group of heroes. He was the most characterless. He was just afraid to defend his position, so he listened to others. All this conversation was overheard by an age who was standing near the half-open door. She couldn't believe what the guy was saying. Her teacher wasn't like that at all. At least she hadn't seen anything like it. They will continue to his story. He said that Aden was ready to do anything to protect his life. Abel spoke negatively about him, despite the fact that he was fulfilling Stark's demands. At that moment, he believed that Aden also deserved revenge. Suddenly Needs burst into the room. She abruptly opened the door and shouted that all this was not true. Everyone immediately turned around and looked at the girl. Leela screamed her name. They didn't think that someone was eavesdropping on them outside the door. Nade says that Aden was indeed appointed to the post of head of the Knights because he was in a group of heroes. He was able to become the head of the Knights only through connections, but Nade still believes him for another reason, and she's going to tell a story that, in her opinion, will be able to prove that Aden is a good person and deserves to be the head of the Knights. She tells that the teacher was the one who saved her. The girl remembers herself as a child. She lived on the street, walked in shabby old clothes, and was constantly freezing. Dee says she doesn't care which group her teacher was in. She believes that he is worthy because she trusts him. She has known him for a single year and knows her teacher very well. Leela looks at the girl in disbelief. Galgo also looks at Miage without stopping chewing his food. Everyone fixed their eyes on the girl, who was waiting for at least some reaction after her story. Abel was trying to figure out what was wrong with the girl. He could believe that Aden had saved the girl. Abel thinks that the whole story about saving Needs is just nonsense. He thinks that if this is true, then it means that someone forced Aden to do it. He always fulfilled the will of other Pio. Galgo stretches out his hand to Leela. The girl notices it and turns to her. Galgo wipes his mouth from the crumbs of food and asks if they are really talking about that man in armor who met them near the gate. Galgo points to his nose and says that there is a very strange smell coming from him. Leela looks intently at the girl and tries to understand what this means. She didn't notice anything like that, since she wasn't a half-beast. Aden was standing in one of the rooms on a dark night. He leaned his hand against the wall and wondered why Abel was still alive. He also remembered how the guy jumped forward to take the blow for Stark and frozen stone for life. The man was very worried. He repeated to himself several times that it was too late. He's already done something terrible, so it's too late to think about the consequences and about the guy who came back after 20 years. Someone left not far from this room. A creature with wings and a long tail was sitting on the hill of the fortress, who was laughing and flashing its yellow eyes. It wasn't in the mood. After her conversation with Abel, she slammed the door before she left and went to her room. The girl was still convinced that her teacher was a good person. Abel clenched his hand into a fist and thought that Aden could not be as kind as Nate had told him for a long time. He does not think about considering the option that the man has really changed. But then the guy still admits the idea that Aden could have changed after all. He grits his teeth because of the strain. If Aden has really changed, then will Abel be able to take revenge on him? Abel was very gloomy. Leela was looking at the guy all the time with concern in her eyes. She wanted to defuse the situation somehow and calm the guy down. She didn't like the fact that the situation was only getting more heated. Suddenly Leela starts talking. She says that she was very happy. The girl is waiting for the guy's reaction to these words. She thinks she's at least got his attention. Abel raises his head and looks questioningly at the girl. He does not understand what the girl is driving, so he waits for the continuation of her phrase. He'll have a lot to think about after dinner. Leela recalls that Abel during their journey first started talking about himself when he was talking about a group of heroes. It was then that she learned something about him, so she was very pleased. Abel's eyes widen. Everyone falls silent. Then Leela just blushes and smiles. She thinks she could at least distract the guy from thinking about the former member of the hero group Aden. The guy is in turmoil. He tries to understand when he was talking about a group of heroes and himself. He doesn't remember anything like that were over. He does not like to tell anything about those times. The room was very quiet as no one started talking. Abel was still in a stupor and Leela was looking at him with a smile. This has been going on for a long time. Galgo shook her head from side to side and beyond. She was very bored and she did not understand why everyone abruptly stopped talking. But at that moment she was most concerned about the food on the table, not the conversations. Suddenly Leela gets up from her chair and says that she needs to go to the bathroom. She is heading out of the room very quickly. The girl decided that she should leave for a while. Galgo lies down on the bed and tells Abel that they need to go to bed. The guy was still tense, but still agreed with the girl. At that moment it started raining outside. Leela was standing near the wall and blushing because she just ran out of the room under the pretext that she needed to go to the bathroom. She didn't know what other reason she could think of. She holds her head in her hands and blushing even more says that their conversation was very awkward. It was awkward for her to remember about that very conversation about the group of heroes, but she had to in order to somehow distract the guy. Leela was weary because there was a very strange atmosphere. The girl decides that she needs to stop thinking about it and go back. She assumes that Abel and Galgo are already waiting for her to go to bed. The girl walks down the long corridor back to the room. She can't find a room for a long time, but then she remembers the route and comes closer to the right corner behind which their room is located. When the girl turns the corner, she sees Aden, who was heading somewhere. She abruptly took a step back to hide behind the corner. She decided that she should follow the man. Aden looked very tense. He lowers his head and says that he did everything as they agreed. He reports that everything is ready. The man seemed to be fulfilling someone's demand again. Leela is trying to figure out who Aden is talking to. She looks around the corner and sees no one. Then she looks even harder and notices that Aden is also missing. Although a second ago, he was standing right in the middle of a long corridor. The girl comes around the corner and tries to figure out where the man has gone and who he was talking to. She can't believe that a man could disappear so abruptly. Moreover, a couple of seconds ago she saw him. At this time a bat-like creature appears behind her. It was hanging from the ceiling and laughing. The creature was watching its victim and waiting for the moment when the girl would notice it. Leela heard laughter and looked around frightened. At that moment, lightning thundered in the street. The creature says, "It's time for them to start the fight." The creature was overjoyed. Unexpectedly the gates of the fortress are pierced with the help of a huge ram in the shape of a dragon. A rumble is heard throughout the fortress. The locks fly off and the gates collapse. The wooden parts of the gate fly to the sides. Galgo turns at the sound. Leela and the other knights also turned around at the sound, not understanding what happened. They were all sitting inside the fortress, but they heard very well how something happened to the gate. One of the knights who was on the tower of the fortress began to ring the bell and shout that they were attacked by the army of the Demon King. Monsters were breaking into the fortress. They screamed and growled. The monsters decided to attack suddenly at night as there are only terrible creatures and the army of the Demon King. They didn't care about people and their willingness wants to have never been distinguished by honesty or fairness. Abel runs up to the teacher and asks him to give the command. Even looks unsure. He says he will make a decision now. He shouts for all troops to move to the main gate. Abel takes off his raincoat and says that Leela has not returned. He asks Scalpel to go and find the girl. Valuable obeys and tries to smell the girl in order to find her, or at least traces indicating her location. Galgo asks if Abel will join the battle. Abel replies that he will not join as they first need to find Leela. He won't leave the girl alone in danger. Moreover, he decided that her safety would also be a priority. Now Abel says that if someone gets in their way, he will immediately deal with him and will not spare him. Galgo rejoices because in this case, they will participate in many fights and battles. Monsters attacked the fortress, they flew in, spewed fire, or tried to strike with weapons. All the guards of the fortress tried to fight off the monsters with bows and swords, but they did little to help. At this time, Abel and Galgo were running along the top of one of the towers, while everyone else was trying to defend themselves from the army of the Demon King. Abel and Galgo were not going to help the knights, as they had a completely different goal. Abel notices that the Demon King's army has a clear advantage. Abel suddenly feels in danger. Monsters were heading towards them with Galgo, who are going to stop the guy in the girl. A huge creature resembling a stump jumped down and landed right in front of Abel and Galgo. It stared at the guy and growled. The creature was huge and wouldn't. Abel immediately folded the seal and was about to cast his spell, gain the magic beam directly at the stump. At this time, Galgo ducked so that the beam did not hit her but hit directly into the monster that blocked their path. The magic beam hit right into the stump. The creature began to be covered with a stone shell, stood in a stupor and could not move. He wanted to attack Abel again, but the petrification came to an end and the monster froze. At this time, another monster began to fly up to them, similar to a huge bird. He made an unpleasant loud sound and waved his wings, raising dust and dirt from the ground. Galgo ran forward to attack him. She jumped in, swinging, struck with her hand. She had released her claws, so the blow was very strong. The monster was defeated with a single blow. Abel and Galgo resumed moving forward again. Abel asked where they should run next. Galgo pointed ahead with her hand. Then they jumped down from the tower right where Needs was fighting monsters. Nade fought back with her sword and shield. She said there were too many monsters. The girl was sure that at this rate they would lose. There were many times fewer knights and they were inferior to the monsters in strength. At this time, Abel and Galgo landed on the ground. Together they swept through the crowds of monsters and removed everyone who stood in their way. All the monsters just flew to the side or turned into stone. Abel smiled and praised Galgo. He did not expect that the girl would keep up with him. Galgo blushed and smiled to she said she shouldn't be praised. She adds that she is still far from the Demon King. The knights and Nade stare at Galgo and Abel, dumbfounded. The knights said they were very strong and wondered who they marveled at the strength and speed of Abel and Galgo. Somewhere up there was a creature with wings that was watching everything that was happening. It seemed to him that the rumors were true. He was grinning in Abel. Abel and Galgo stood back to back. They had slain all the monsters and now the creatures were lying unconscious under their feet. They defeated almost all the monsters with just the two of them. Legion. The knights thanked Abel and Galgo for helping with the defense of the fortress. The girl says that without their help, they would not have coped. The girl examined the fortress and the defeated monsters. Abel turns around and asks the girl not to misunderstand him, but they defeated all the monsters just because they prevented them from finding Leela. The guy says that he was not going to save the inhabitants of the fortress. Galgo suddenly feels something. Her ears are raised and her eyes are wide open. She turns to Abel and says that the monster attack is not over yet. She feels that a new wave is coming. Everyone turned to the gate, which was broken. They saw a new huge horde of monsters coming straight to the fortress. Everyone was set up for a new long battle even though the knights were already exhausted. Suddenly, the monsters began to attack again and the knights began to defend. There were even more monsters than the previous time. They all attacked the knights very sharply and tried to get inside the castle. Abel asks what's going on and how the monsters could have come from inside the castle. Needs repels the attacks and says it's just impossible. She is sure that the monsters could not have opened all the gates themselves. Needs reflects that if another enemy comes through the main gate, they will be squeezed from both sides and it will be even more difficult for them to fight back. The girl at this moment counterattacks another blow of the monster. Needs couldn't figure out where the monsters in the castle came from. She assumes that there is a traitor among them, but she did not know who this traitor was since there was no one suspicious among the knights. The man in the raincoat opened another gate. Galgo felt it. Galgo pointed her hand at Aden and said that it was he who was the traitor since he smelled of demons. She just did not immediately understand. Aden turns around and sees Abel looking at him gloomily. They will start to get angry. He says he knew it. He calls Aden a traitor. The man is scared because he understands that he has been found out and now he will have to answer for his act. Nade stands right in front of Aden and blocks Abel's path. She says there has been some mistake. She's trying to find evidence of Aden's innocence. The girl begins to justify him. Abel asks the girl to shut up and asks if she really doesn't notice anything. He asks how long the girl will protect Aden, for he says that everything is already clear. Me stands her ground and says that the teacher saved her so he couldn't do that. At this moment, a creature with wings appears behind Aden and hits him in the back with a crystal. The guy screams in pain. The creature sighs and the crystal in the back begins to act. Says that Aden coped badly even with such a small task. She knew that she couldn't rely on him because he was a cowardly person. He didn't start screaming as his body begins to transform. He looks at his hands and sees that they are changing. He is terrified of turning into a monster. There is nothing a man can do to avoid transformation. Nate and Abel are shocked to see what is happening. The creature continues and says that in any case, Aden deserved his reward. She laughs as she watches Aden's changes. A creature appears right in front of him pulling Leela in his hands. He greets everyone and says that it is an officer of the army of the Demon King. She calls her name Jamie. Abel screams Leyland's name. He looks at the girl anxiously. Jamie takes off and smiling says it's time for them to start the second round. The girl flies away, leaving Abel in needs with the monster Aden. Galgo takes off abruptly and is about to attack Jamie. Jamie is still floating in the air at this moment, so the girl decides that this is a great chance to return Leela, who is still held hostage by her. The girl does not have time to react and misses the blow of the monster's huge hand. The monster's hand appeared from the side and struck a strong blow, because of which the girl falls to the ground and hisses in pain. She loses consciousness and remains lying on the ground. A huge green monster resembling a dragon appears. He growls very loudly and glares at the knights. Aden loses control of himself and is going to deal with all the knights of the fortress. Needs realizes that her teacher has transformed into a monster. She looks at him in horror. The girl does not understand how this could happen. She believed in her teacher to the last and that he would help them in the battle with monsters. Jamie takes off and tells Abel to continue playing his role in a play called Revenge. She laughs and enjoys everything that is happening. The girl obviously knows quite a lot of information about Abel. The knights are very much afraid of Aden. Abel is trying to figure out how Jambi knows about his revenge. Then the guy stops because he decides that he has no time to think about such a thing right now. Abel needs to concentrate on Aden and his transformation into a monster. Abel folds the seal and uses his petrification spell on Aden. The monster starts blocking the spell and growling. It cannot be turned into stone. Abel is shocked that the monster was able to block his strongest spell. Aden swings his arm and hits the ground, descending stone straight at the young man. Abel tries to hide from the stones, but a few still hit him, and he curses. He didn't expect that Aden in the form of a monster would be so strong. Abel understands that he cannot block physical attacks with the decryption skill. He decides that he needs to come up with a new strategy. The guy is thinking about what he needs to do. The monster is trying to strike again. Abel dodges and decides that he needs to concentrate on dodging until he finds a chance to use magic. It is this strategy that he chooses since it seems to be the most optimal. Abel turns around and sees Galgo lying motionless on the ground. She never recovered from Aden's blow. The girl was lying face down and was in no hurry to get up to help Abel. Abel then turns the other way and sees Nade sitting on her lap. The girl looked very depressed. She didn't know what to do now because her teacher had turned into a monster. The age was annoyed that the teacher had turned into a monster. The girl couldn't believe it. But what saddened her more than anything was that Aden was in cahoots with a monster from the Demon King's army. The monster stared at the girl, needs notice this and widened her eyes in shock. She was trying to figure out what to do. She didn't want to fight with her teacher, as he was a person close to her. Abel suddenly shouted sharply to the girl that she had to fight. He convinces the girl that her teacher is no longer human. He is trying to convey to the girl that she will have to fight for her life no matter what. Abel folds the seals and jumps straight at the monster to attack. The guy shouts to Needs that she is a knight who has something to protect. Aden grabs the guy with one hand and clamps him down. Abel grunts in pain. Nade recalls that Aden once asked her if he knew what it was like to be a knight. He asked this question when the girl was still a very young child who knew nothing about the world and its structure. The age jumps up and strikes directly at the monster's arm, but monster screams in pain and releases Abel. Abel quickly groups up to land on the ground without damage. Abel and Nelland on the ground. Nellen asks the guy to understand her correctly. She says that she is not doing this to help Abel. The girl says she doesn't care about Abel. She raises her sword and says she is a knight. Nate says it's a knight's duty to risk his life to protect others. That's what Aden taught her and she's going to follow his teachings. The girl is determined she will try to save her teacher. Abel smiled and asked the girl to buy him time. The girl obeys him and raises her sword. She's going to get the monster's attention so that Abel can stab the monster. The monster strikes Manhwa, but the girl blocks the blow with a shield. The girl looked out of her shield and said she wasn't going to lose me. It says that the teacher should be well aware of how stubborn the girl is. The monster growls and starts hitting Niche. The girl stares at the monster. The monster is trying to pronounce the girl's name. He regains a little control over his body and mind. The monster stops for a few seconds. Aden remembered a little girl he found in one of the alleys and he fled to this country to hide from the Demon King. It was in this city that he met a girl who had lost her parents to the Demon King. Aden felt sorry for the girl and held out his hand to her. At that moment, Ni immediately began to say that she would become a worthy knight just like him. She constantly followed her teacher and listened to his every word. Aden then asked the girl to listen to him. The man said that being a knight means risking your life to protect others. Needs thank the teacher for saving her and helping her find the meaning of life. But Aden was no knight. He was just improvising the whole time and lying. He has always been a terrible person who adapts to conditions in order to survive. He didn't care about anyone. The man now looks at the girl and is proud that she has become very strong. Even though she grew up on his lies, he did not think that he could become a good teacher for someone. Abel at this time thanked the girl for buying him time. He was going to stab the monster and in the fight. Abel raises his hands and folds the seal. He has already come up with a new plan and a spell with which he will defeat the monster that Aden has turned into. Abel lowers his hand and directs the magic beam directly at Aden's monster. He's going to deal with Aden and save Leela before it's too late. The guy holds the beam aimed at Aden for a long time. All the knight's nature enabler, hiding from the bright light. That huge beam hits Aden in the form of a monster. He growls and jerks with his hands, but feels like something prevents him from moving. Abel says, so for the monster, his body was wrapped in chains that prevented it from moving. Huge chains bound his body and absorbed all the magical energy so the monster could not do anything. Aden was restored to his human form. When the monster's shell was completely asleep, Aden fell to his knees and began to collapse as he no longer had the strength. Dawn was coming near, and Abel approached. Stay. The guy pressed his hand to the monster. He says that the teacher turned into a monster because of the crystal that James stuck into him. The guy closes his eyes and uses his powers. He understands that he can now use the spell decryption since the monster has calmed down and is no longer rampaging. The monster, his shell fell off and Aden fell to the ground. Needs ran up to the man and was glad that he had become a man again. But the man still felt terrible, both physically and mentally. Aden cleared his throat and tried to address Abel. He apologized to the guy for everything he did to him. During their journey with the heroes, he understands that he treated the guy terribly because of his own cowardice. Abel looked at the guy in shock. He sighed. The guy decided to listen to the end of Aden. Although it was unpleasant for him to remember everything that happened 20 years ago during the journey with the heroes. Aden says that he did all these terrible things because he was weak. He could only grovel before the strong. He didn't know how to respond to those who are stronger than him because he was very scared. Aden says that even when he found his place, he betrayed everyone who is dear to him in order to save his life. He has not changed even though he tried to become a ray of light for one girl. Aden says that when he saw an age fighting, he felt ashamed of his weakness. The girl he raised became very strong not only physically, but also spiritually. The girl looked at her teacher in shock. She listened attentively to him, waiting for further words. Aden doesn't want them to forgive him. He just thinks he has to say it. He apologizes again. I feel great guilt and responsibility for everything that happened in the fortress. Abel opened his mouth in shock. It seemed strange to him that he believed his words. From the intonation, he understood that the man was not like a witch or a dwarf. He could feel the sincerity in the man's words, but he still doesn't understand why he should forgive him or over. He could not forgive a man after everything that had happened to him. He will never be able to forgive him in his life. And then her voice tells the guy that he cannot forgive a man since he suffered in stone for 20 years. He lived only for the place, that's why he came so far. He swears and can understand why he should forgive a man. A magic ray hits even right in the chest. Everyone is in shock. Abel and Needs can't figure out what happened, but they guessed who could have wounded the knight so that he would not tell anything more superfluous. Abel saw Jaime sitting on one of the towers. The girl yawned and said she was bored. She wanted to see the battle and the suffering of people, not tears and apologies. They were strangers to girls. At this moment, the guy instantly takes off and takes Layla from the girl's hands. The guy holds the girl's body in his hands. He is glad that Leela is alright. Jaime looks at Abel and asks if he himself wants to yawn from everything that is happening. She asked since when the guy became so kind. She had been watching him for a long time and hadn't noticed anything like this. Before Jaime asks the guy to look at himself, she assures the guy that he doesn't need Leela. She says that the black flame of his hatred should burn everything to the ground, so he should not prioritize the safety of ordinary people. Jaime laughs and says that the one he hates most in the world will be waiting for Abel in the castle of the Demon King. She is sure that Abel is waiting for a not very pleasant surprise in the form of an old friend from the team of heroes. Jaime took off and flew away. She had nothing else to do in the fortress. As the knights along with Abel fought off the attack of monsters, and Aden turned back into a human and left the world of the living. Abel tried to stop her, but nothing came of it. Abel decides to give up trying to stop Jaime, as at the moment he needs to focus on Aden, who was living out his last seconds of life. The guy heard Needs trying to call out to the teacher several times. She tearfully asked him not to leave the girl. The man was in a terrible state. The girl understood where everything was going, but she did not want the teacher to leave her alone. The man is trembling. He stretches out his hand to her and says that it was not he who became her worthy teacher. Aden is sure that it was the girl who taught him courage. At the last moment, the man died. The age began to cry. She didn't want to accept that the teacher had left her after all. The girl still did not blame him for lying and betrayal, since he was her savior, the only person who gave her a helping hand. Abel watched all this with a gloomy look. He no longer thought about revenge on Aden. Abel thinks that Aden was just an object of revenge for him. Now he doesn't care about the fate of a man. He repented and left the world of the living, so there was nothing he could do. But for Needs, Aden was a mentor, so for her this is a very strong loss, comparable to the loss of a loved one. It was hard for her. The guy saw it and felt no better than her. It was a sunny day outside. The fortress was still staying after the monster attack. Although it had damage in some places, he was very quiet inside the fortress as everyone gathered outside. One of the knights held out a bag on a red pillow as a gift. She thanked Abel and Galgo for their help. She understood that this was not enough, but they had nothing else, so they could only offer one bag of coins. Abel, Galgo and Leela were standing on a bridge made of logs. Right in front of them were knights who were trying to thank the company for their help. Abel wanted to get it over with as soon as possible since he didn't need the rewards. Now Abel was going to move out again to find the next member of. Suddenly someone shouts and asks Abel to stop. It was Nade. She ran through the entire fortress to have time to talk to the guy and thank Galgo and Leela for their help. Mage runs out of the fortress. She sweeps through all the knights and stands right in front of Abel, Galgo and Leela. The girl, blushing and looking resolutely at the guy, says that she wants to go with Abel. Abel and Layla fall into a stupor. The guy looks at her with a question. He doesn't understand why. After everything that happened, the girl decided to ask to join their squad. The guy assumed that the girl would be angry at him. Nade looks Abel in the eye and says that this battle with monsters and Aden made her understand one very important thing. Now she understands that in order to protect everyone, she needs to defeat the Demon King as quickly as possible. Abel immediately gets on the defensive and refuses. He says that he is only interested in revenge on his abusers, so the girl can try to find someone else. He is sure that he is definitely not suitable for this role. The girl frowns. She is silent for a long time as she thinks about what she can say to the guy so that he agrees. Nade's sure that they need to cooperate to fight the Demon King. Each says that in this world, Abel is the only one who can do something against the Demon King. His decoding skill can dispel any spell. Moreover, he had already met the Demon King. Nade presses his hand to his chest and says that he will try to convince the guy to defeat the Demon King since he is the only one who can do it. She thinks it's her chivalrous duty. Abel recoils when he hears about the girl's plans. He frowns because he doesn't understand why he has to do something like this. He has his own goals that he pursues. The Demon King is not one of the targets. Then Leela approaches the guy. She bends down and whispers to the guy to take Needs into the squad. Leela says that Needs will be able to cover Abel in battle and will perfectly cover his weaknesses. One of Abel's weaknesses is physical strength, which Needs possesses to a sufficient extent. The guy turns away from Leela. He closes his eyes and sighs. Abel understands that Leela is right and Manhwa can really be useful. The guy remembers the previous fights and understands that physical strength will be useful to them. Abel says an age can do anything. Need shouts that she is happy to work together with Abel. Galgo and Leela rejoice that the new person in the team. Thus Needs joined the team, which included Abel with the skill of decoding the novice magician Leela and the semi-B scalpel. The whole team resumed their journey again. They followed Abel. The whole team visited many towns and villages. They visited the markets to stock up on food and equipment. Galgo was always staring at the food, while Leela was talking to me and Abel was looking around. The team met various monsters and demons on the way to the next member of the hero group with whom they fought. When Leela and Abel, Useals and Magic Galgo and Meat showed their physical strength. After dark the team decided to make a halt. The moon was shining in the sky. It was very quiet and peaceful. The team stopped near the mountain. Needs built a fire and put the food to cook. The others sat and watched. Needs took off her armor to get some rest. Then she started cooking again. She took the ladle off the fire and showed it to everyone. The girl asked everyone to look at the dish she had prepared for dinner. The girl was very happy to demonstrate her skills. She asked everyone to join the meal and start eating. The aides was sure that everyone should like her cooking. Galgo immediately bumped into the plate and began to eat very quickly without chewing. Needs looked at the girl and laughed with her quick reaction. At this time, Abel was sitting not far from them on a rock. Leela also took a plate to taste the dish that Needs had prepared. She turned to Abel and noticed the guy's detachment. She was worried about him again, since Abel had been very silent lately. Leela turned to Abel and attracted his attention. She wanted to ask the guy something. She decided to find out who would be next from the list of those heroes to whom Abel wanted to take revenge for his 20-year imprisonment. Abel becomes gloomy. He looks away and is silent for a while, either thinking about how he will take revenge or because of the memories of the cruel treatment towards him. After a few seconds, the guy still starts talking about the next hero from their team named Mastermind, whom they are going to take revenge on. The girl sits closer and listens attentively to Abel. Abel says that Mastermind studied at a magic school and became a monk. He was considered an elite. The guy was very smart and purposeful. Abel says that many in school were equal to the master since he mastered a huge number of spells. He was a very capable student who did not possess physical strength, but stood out with a brilliant mind. That Abel is silent again for a while and after a few seconds adds that Mastermind was someone who was completely different from the rest in their group of heroes. Even Abel himself admits this. Leela asks to explain. Abel looks down and says that Mastermind never mocked him. He didn't force me to do anything. He did not conduct experiments on Abel, and even more so the guy did not touch him under the pretext of training. Abel recall is one of the days of traveling and a team of heroes. On this day, he was tied to the trunk of a tree behind the guy. On the bark stones were drawn that needed to be hit with a knife. Once the knife flew inches from Abel's face, he cried out in fear. All this time, Lanoa and Stark are throwing knives. He was Lanoa who almost hit Abel. Stark cried out that the girl was in the 50-point zone and then praised her. He was delighted. Lanoa smiled and thanked the guy. She picked up the next knife, began stroking its blade. The girl asked Mastermind if the guy wanted to participate too. She assures him that it's fun. Mastermind was standing near the tree trunk all this time. He was just leaning against a tree and reading a book. The guy was not interested in the magnifications of the other heroes. He preferred to spend. Mastermind pushes away from the tree, lowers the book and smiling says that he refuses. He says he wants to read a book that he found more interesting than throwing knives. Stark made a face and said that the guy was very boring. He doesn't understand how it was possible to choose books instead of throwing knives. Aden stood next to him and just kept quiet because he didn't want to attract attention. Also standing next to them was Gordon, who gave a thumbs up. Abel stared in horror at everything that was happening. He was sweating a lot from the exertion. He tends to even more when he heard Stark say that Aden would be the next to throw knives. Aden couldn't refuse and Gordon laughed out loud because of his reaction. Abel was looking directly at Mastermind. At that moment he saw his gaze staring back at him. He did not smile, did not express contempt or pity, he was just looking. During the fights, the guy crossed his fingers and struck monsters with magic. He always had a book in his hand. He did not experience any special difficulties during fights with monsters. When he was dealing with his opponents, he was just watching the rest of the heroes. He watched Stark fight his opponents and noticed something, but no one knows what exactly. The guy always looked either at the book or what was happening around him. He didn't look impressed, rather, on the contrary, detached. It seemed that he didn't care about what was happening. Abel again notices that Mastermind was always just looking. He always had such an expression on his face, as if he was surrounded by nothing but insects. He didn't consider the others to be his equal. Abel says that Mastermind thought so not only about Abel, but also about the whole group of heroes. Therefore, the guy was in no hurry to join their games and mock Abel. Abel says he has very little information about maths. He seemed to him a mysterious guy who was difficult to understand because he was always distant and silent with Abel. They just exchanged glances and that was it. Leela is silent and looks at the guy with pity. She can't believe that Abel has been through so much terrible. She also didn't understand why Mastermind didn't do anything and just stood on the sidelines. Maybe he could help the guy. Suddenly Nades gets up from his seat and screamed. She blushed and her expression looked worried. Abel was scared because of the girl's sudden jump. He looked at her questioningly. Nades very quickly put a plate with the dish she had prepared into Abel's hand. The girl told the guy to eat his portion. Abel said he refused. Maid screams and asks why the guy doesn't want to eat her dish. Abel becomes serious. He frowns and says he doesn't want to eat what Nades is cooked as she doesn't cook well. The girl immediately screams again in discontent. She asks how guy dares to talk about her food like that. Nate asked the guy what he knew about cooking. She is sure that she cooks perfectly as everyone told her about it. The guy says that the problem is that people from her kingdom have no taste. Leela immediately jumped up from her seat and tried to calm down Nades and Abel. Nate asks the guy to look at the galgo. She says that the girl ate several portions and very quickly Joggle rubs the back of her head and smiling says that everything is better than the leftovers she ate before. She says that Anita's cooked dish tastes very close to those leftovers. They and Abel begin the battle. The girl screams that Galgo is lying, so Nades does not admit that her food is tasteless. Abel shouts that the girl simply has no taste. Galgo says that the majority is always right. Leela just looks at the battle of her friends in silence for a while, then she still decides to approach them and try to calm them down. She said they just needed to talk. Suddenly someone threw a plate with a dish and it hit Leela right in the face. She was standing all wet on the girl's head. There were vegetables that were in the plate. Everyone immediately stopped when they noticed Leela with a plate on her head. Leela started to get angry. She became gloomy and silent. The girl was thinking about what she would do to Nich, Galgo and Abel now because they threw a plate of food at her, which ruined her clothes and hairstyle. The girl threw the plate off her head and shouted for everyone to calm down immediately. She was very angry. She looked like a furious dragon that was emitting fire from its mouth. Everyone stopped immediately. Abel looked at the girl with horror. Lead started to smile nervously, and Galgo was so scared that she couldn't close her mouth from shock. Abel and Nades were in no hurry to put away their weapons. Leela has never been so angry. She ordered everyone to take their seats and calm down. Everyone immediately fell to their knees and lowered their heads. Leela continued to express her dissatisfaction. The girl told them to stop as they only make a noise in the forest and can bring monsters. Leela says that Nades needs to work on cooking to improve her culinary skills. Maid screams in shock when Leela turns to Galgo and says that the girl needs to control her anger. Galgo salutes and says he will follow Layla's instructions. Layla pointed her finger sharply at Abel and said that it was very important to eat, so he should do what Nades had prepared. The guy was confused. He didn't expect such violent reactions from Layla either. The guy looks at the girl and thinks about what he should do now. He was afraid to refuse as he had never seen Leela so furious. He still decides that for his own safety, it is better to eat Nades cooking. At this time Nay and Galgo, who were in a stupor or standing aside, they looked at how Leela was able to persuade Abel to eat the food. After all, the guy looked gloomy, but he emptied his plate and thanked him for the food. Leela immediately changed her mood. She became a bright and friendly girl again. The girl folded her hands at her waist, tilted her head and smiled at the guy. At the same time, she praised him for eating everything. Nade was slowly recovering, but she was still staring wide-eyed at Leela and Abel, who had been forced to eat all the food. Galgo sat with her and smiled broadly. Nade turned to Abel and asked why the guy listens to what Leela says. Leela and Abel turned around watching the girl in disbelief. They were silent for a while. Nade asks if Abel can listen to Leela and everything because they have known each other for a long time. The girl sighed because she thought that the most likely option of all that could be. Leela laughs and says that Abel has just become more accommodating over time. She assures the girl that she needs to talk to him more often so that the guy at least starts telling something about himself or listening. Abel's eyes widened. He only now realized that he had really become more accommodating compared to what he had been before. Before he realized that he started traveling with his comrades. The guy was looking at his companions. He saw how Nade smiled tenderly looking at how Galgo began to reach out to Leela because the girl no longer frightened her. Leela raised her hands and asked what the girl was talking about. It seems to Abel that it has become more fun. The guy remembers his previous companions, heroes with whom he had to defeat the Demon King. He thinks that he has not yet understood whether it is bad or vice versa good. Abel himself did not notice how he began to smile because of the thoughts that he was comfortable in the company of new companions. He rubs the back of his head and tries not to show his smile even though he is warmed by thoughts about it. The guy continued to watch his. Galgo said something to the now frightened Leela. All Needs just smiled and laughed. So another night of their joint journey passed. Morning came and the team got ready to go. Abel led his companions through the forest, which was very gloomy. Pros were sitting on the branches everywhere watching the travelers. One of the crows caught, and as a result, all the birds flew away. Galgo was scared because the bird caught Needs came closer to Abel and said that it seemed that the situation in the forest was not very calm. Then Leela stops abruptly and notices something. She asks everyone else to stop. The girl looks anxiously ahead and is going to ask the guide if they are moving in the right direction. Abel in the other stop. Abel looks gloomily at the settlement to which they have come. Leela still asks if this is really the place where Mastermind lives. It's hard for her to believe it because their team came to the settlement of Tender. It looked abandoned. There were little decrepit houses everywhere, but fences of many houses were broken. There were trees everywhere with long bare branches. Abel said they needed to move on. They passed the settlement houses. Galgo and Nade looking at everything with interest. The settlers come out in white clothes and also look at the newly arrived travelers. Many residents seem suspicious. They whisper and close the doors. They don't look friendly. On the contrary, detached, everyone didn't hesitate to inspect Abel and his team. Galgo was a little angry at this reaction. She folded her hands at her waist and asked why they were being stared at so intently, as if they were bandits or monsters. Leela noticed that too. She looked suspiciously at all the residents. Abel raises his hand. His inner voice says that the guy should not be distracted by something like that. He keeps in his head the idea that there must be a mastermind. The settlement, another of the group of heroes who must know revenge. The guy clenches his hand into a fist and presses it to him. He resolutely looks ahead and repeats to himself that he must take revenge on his abuser, otherwise he will not be able to move on and take revenge on the most important defender. As Abel and his companions move forward, they were watched from around the corner. The secret person, who was sitting behind all the travelers, turned her gaze to Abel in the US magic. The guy stopped abruptly and opened his eyes, but as he felt something strange his vision went dark abruptly. He began to lose consciousness and fall forward. Thus the guy fell unconscious to the ground. Nade stared at Abel in shock, not understanding what had just happened. Galgo opened her mouth in surprise and immediately frowned, as she also did not understand anything. Leela looked at the guy anxiously. All the girls fell into a stupor, but after a second they became animated and began to approach Abel to find out what had happened to him. Leela knelt down in front of the guy. Tage was ready to draw her sword and Galgo was looking around. The guy was lying on the ground, unconscious. Everyone tried to shout to him and somehow bring him to consciousness, but the guy did not respond and continued to lie. They're not reacting to any sounds in any way. Leech, Galgo and Leela were standing right in front of the guy and trying to figure out what had happened to him. Galgo was still holding her mouth open in surprise. Nade was taking her sword out of its scabbard, and Leela tried to call out to the guy several times. Galgo started waving her hands up and down, asking if the guy really died. Nade started to panic too. She decided to examine the guy again, and then started screaming that the guy was not coming to his senses. She asks what they should do now. Leela becomes more serious. She asks the girls to calm down as they need to take the guy to a safe place first and not panic. The girl decides that they need to hide in a safe place since it is unknown who attacked them. Nate and Galgo immediately calm down and obey Leela. Maid says she understands everything. She walks up to Abel, picks him up, and holds him on her back. The girl is going to take Abel to a safe place, as Leela said. She was watching the guy who still hadn't woken up. Leela felt the guy's breathing, which calmed her down because it was so clear that he was still alive and just lying unconscious. But the girl decided not to think about it at the moment, but to concentrate on a safe place for Abel. Nades carried the guy to the nearest safe place. It turned out to be the nearest tavern. Nade saw the sign and immediately took the guy, while Galgo and Leela were thinking about what to do next. Nade gently put the guy to bed. Leela pulled up the blankets. The guy was still unconscious, so Leela was very worried. She understood that the guy couldn't just fall off his feet. She wondered who might have attacked them. There was a boy standing in the doorway of the room where everyone was. He smiled while the girls thanked him for the fact that the guests took them in. They were very quickly provided with a room and everything they needed. The guy says it's not a problem for them. The boy looked very friendly. They'd sat down on a chair and asked what could have happened to Abel. She says that the guy is not going to regain consciousness at all. She can't figure out why the girl is very much concerned about his condition. And Leela bowed her head because once again, they could not somehow help the guy. Galgo was sitting right next to the guy and looked at him sadly. She was very upset. She gently poked her finger in his face to make him come to his senses, but there was no result from this. Then the girl started hitting the guy in the face, but he still didn't wake up. The girl got angry and started biting Abel's hand to wake him up, but there were no reactions from him. Leela came up to the girl and started slapping her on the head, demanding that she stop. Nades turns around and asks if it could have been a magic attack. She puts forward such an assumption since they did not notice or feel anything. Moreover, Abel could not just lose consciousness. Leela says Abel always protect himself with magic. She remembers the moment in the battle with the witch when she shot an arrow at him. That the guy put seals on his body in advance. Leela looks ahead and says that he wouldn't have fainted from the magic attack. She thinks it's something else. Nate asks if it could have been a physical attack. Then she says that this is unlikely since the guy has no wounds and abrasions on his body. She doesn't understand what could have led to this in such a case. Leela looks weirdly at the guy who is still unconscious. His face was relaxed. It felt like he was just sleeping, but the girl understood that something was wrong. The girl turned away and clenched her hand into a fist. It hurt her to look at the guy who was in a serious condition. She felt she had to help him. The girl has to come up with something. The girl remembers how during one of the evenings when Needs and Abel staged the battle because the guy didn't want to eat, Abel smiled. The girl then turned around and saw his smile. She didn't expect to ever see something like this. At that moment, Leela thought that at last he was able to smile and open up to them a little. It was then that she had hoped that she would be able to remove the burden of revenge from his heart. After all, he was happy, even if only for a moment. All three of them were still standing in front of the bed where Abel was lying. The guy didn't come to his senses, and the girls didn't know what to do since all the assumptions about what was wrong with him were over. They reached a dead end from which it was difficult to get out. Leela clenched her hand into a fist and turned sharply to the side. She looked resolutely at her companions. First, the girl turned to Galgo, then to Niger, and said that they were obliged to help the guy. Nade looked at the girl with a smile. She liked her companion's determination. She was ready to hear her and support her. Moreover, apart from the three of them, Abel no longer had any friends or acquaintances who would help. Nade and Galgo looked at Layla as they thought about what they could do to help Abel. Galgo raises her hand and says that she has a great nose, so she will be able to find the culprit who put the guy to sleep. Nade points to the Galgo and asks how the scent will help them. She is interested in whom the girl is going to sniff if they don't know anyone, especially since the culprit is unknown to them. It would just be useless. Galgo looks gloomy and lowers his ears because she didn't think about it. Layla suddenly has an idea. She says the culprit is most likely Mastermind. She assumes so because of a number of reasons and circumstances. Moreover, Abel has no sworn enemies. Leela says that this is the first time they have come to this settlement. Nobody knows them. Leela assumes that Mastermind realized that Abel was a serious problem and threat to him, so he decided to attack him first and stealthily. The girl believes that this is the most realistic option. Nades looks at Layla in surprise. She had no idea that a girl could be like that. The girl notices that Leela abruptly began to think very calmly and rationally. Leela was usually emotional and vulnerable. Galgo suddenly turned to Leela with a question that no one expected. She noticed the strange behavior and her attitude towards Abel, so she thought that the girl had some warm feelings for the guy. Galgo asks if it's true that the girl is in love with Abel. That's why she tries so hard to save him. Leela blushes and looks at Galgo in shock. She is silent for a while, but after a few seconds, the girl explodes and asks how Galgo could say such a thing. She points out that they are members of the same team, which is why she behaves like this. She explains all this with simple excitement and concern for the guy. Galgo interrupts the girl and says that she only wanted to point out that Leela is not the only one who loves the guy. Leela falls into a stupor after saying these words. She just looks at Galgo in shock and does not hurry to open her mouth to answer. Galgo blushes, presses his hand to his chest and says that Abel saved her, so he loves him too. The girl is sure that Nades will support her. Abel really played a very important role in the life of every girl from their team. Nades says she wouldn't say it so loudly, but she really likes Abel. She understands that he is not just a revenge-crazed madman. Moreover, he helped her many times during the defense of the fortress from the attack of the army of the Demon King. Nades says that they still have to help Abel because even though he does not admit that he really helped the girls. Leela blushes and smiles. She is very glad that the others support her in this matter. All the girls decide that together they will save Abel. Now it's their turn to take care of the guy. Leela and Galgo put on their raincoats and go outside to find the culprit, while Neve stays at the tavern to guard Abel until they return. The guy was still unconscious. He did not even imagine how his companions were exerting all their strength in order to save him. They are ready to find the culprit of the guy's serious condition and force him to bring Abel back to consciousness. At this time, somewhere in another space, the guy's body was wrapped in chains that glowed because of magic. The guy was in total darkness. There was nothing around except the chains that wrapped around his body, arms and legs. Abel regains consciousness, but not in the real world. He opens his eyes and tries to figure out what happened. He had a very bad headache and he felt a clouding of his mind. Abel saw nothing and heard nothing, so it was difficult for him to navigate in space. The guy jerks his hand trying to activate the decryption skill, but nothing happens. And the skill of decoding was the key in his arsenal. He understands that he will not be able to get out on his own, but he didn't know what to do. In this case, he couldn't wait for help. The guy didn't realize how much time had passed. It seemed to him as if he was back in the stone. He couldn't move and understand what was going on. Time seemed to have stopped for him, or else he did not exist at all. The guy shivered as soon as he thought that he was back in the stone. He didn't want to repeat that negative experience. The mere memory of it terrifies him. He doesn't want to be stuck in a rock for the rest of his life. Abel remembers how terrible he felt when his heroes left him alone on that field. The guy felt just awful. The flow of thoughts could not stop the realization that he was trapped wait on him. At this time, Leela and Galgo were walking through the streets of the city. They were looking for Mastermind since, first of all suspicions fell on him. He was the penultimate hero that Abel was going to take revenge on. The girls found out his possible location and went to the two-story White House, which many residents talked about. The two-story White House didn't look any better than all the other houses in the settlement. A guy in glasses and a white raincoat met the girls near the gate of the house. The guy was smiling. He looked friendly. The guy asks if they really came to this house as they had heard about the reputation of the Mastermind. He said that Mastermind helped their settlement very much, after which they began to worship him. All the guy was praising the master and telling him that he tried to convince the girls of the exclusivity of the Mastermind. He didn't seem to notice that it was difficult for them to listen to about Mastermind. Layla didn't interrupt him and just watched in silence. The girl tensed up when the guy said that Mastermind would definitely help them. He began to convince them again that Mastermind could solve any problem. Layla looks at the house and thinks that the guy has become a guru and organized his own sect. People in white cloaks were walking everywhere. All the settlers praised Mastermind, constantly talked about what a great man he was. The guy turns to the gate and says that if a girls want he will take them to the Mastermind. He says that a huge number of people have already passed through these gates, so they needed the help of Mastermind. He smiles and points to the gate. The guy saw that the girls were in turmoil, but did not are. The girls were in no hurry to come in as they still had suspicions about the Mastermind sect. Galgo turned to Leela and asked what they would do. Leela says they have no choice. Moreover, if they want to help people regain consciousness, then they will have to go and see Mastermind. Galgo looked out of the gate and saw guys in white robes. They were whispering something in each other's ears. They were very loud, so it caught the girl's attention and she was wondering what they were talking about. The girl looks closely and listens even more. She sees guys madly smiling and laughing. It's funny to the guys because the girls think that they will be taken to the Mastermind. One of the guys says that only the highest elite is allowed to the mass team. He chooses who to join their sect and he chooses only strong and capable people, not Ordina. The second guy says that there is nothing to worry about, because in this case, they will simply be made slaves of the army of the Demon King. After these words, Galgo becomes stunned. Galgo turns abruptly to Leela. She screams her name and pushes her back so that she moves away from the gate of this house. Leela asks what happened. She doesn't understand why the girl reacts so sharply. She didn't hear anything. Galgo and Layla run away from the house covering their faces. The guy who was standing at the gate is trying to call out to them. He stretches out his hand forward, but realizes that the girls have already run far ahead. Galgo remembers again about the words about the slaves of the Demon King. She is horrified when she imagines people in chains walking in a single formation while a huge guardian monster looms over them. Galgo understands that this settlement is an even more dangerous place than they imagined. She was afraid that they might inadvertently be made slaves of the Demon King and then they would not be able to save Abel. Galgo and Leela did not even think about the fact that Mastermind was somehow connected with the Demon King. They hoped that he just got people who praised him, but the guy turned out to be just as terrible as the rest of the characters Abel was talking about. At this time, Mastermind and his guests from the army of the Demon King were having lunch on the top floor of a two-story house. They were sitting in a large room and a huge table, which was covered with various delicious food. The guy remembered Abel, who was considered useless in their team. No on. Mastermind thanks the girl for the information and says that it was thanks to the information provided by the Demon King's army that he was able to immediately find the guy and neutralize him. He was thinking about Abel, but he didn't realize that the guy was already close. The girl who was sitting at the opposite end of the table was Jamie. She was taking a bite of meat from a chicken leg. The girl ate very quickly in a lot. She practically didn't listen to the guy as she found him boring. Jamie was sitting with her legs folded on the table. She looked away because she was bored. She says she was able to provide information, but in a very boring way. The girl does not like to be bored. Mastermind looked at Jamie with a smile. He asked if the Demon King's army was convinced of his loyalty. He has been enslaving people to them for a long time, thereby weakening the local threat from people. Mastermind believes that he has already done a lot for the Demon King. He thinks he deserves something more. The guy hopes that he will be able to negotiate a reward or promotion. The guy adjusts his glasses and asks if it's time for him to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Demon King. He believes that he has already done a lot of things, so he deserves to be one of the closest to the Demon King. Jamie yawns and takes a long time to answer. She says that maybe the Demon King will answer his request, but the girl herself knows nothing and decides nothing. The girl is generally bored being next to the Mastermind. She shows it with all her looks. Mastermind begins to get angry because of the girl's reactions. A vein in his forehead begins to throw up. The guy was very angry, so he really spent a lot of time and effort to get the Demon King to pay attention to him. Mastermind abruptly gets up from his seat, which attracts the girl's attention, and says that he can say differently since Jamie already does not give him an exact answer. The girl looks attentively at the guy. She's expecting his attack. Mastermind looks very angry. A dark aura appears around him. The guy raises his hand and asks if it's time for the girl to make room for him, which he is going to take. The guy doesn't think it was brazen on his part. Jamie stares at the guy and continues to eat. She's grinning like a predator. The girl did not expect that the guy would have the courage to challenge her. At the moment she becomes interested and she decides to accept the challenge. Jamie spreads her wings and takes off right over the table. The table and dishes with food are overturned, which causes a crash. Mastermind is still standing, watching the girl who was creating a whirlwind with her wings. The rest of the people in the house heard strange noises and immediately ran into the room to find out if everything was alright with the Mastermind. They were worried about their guru, so he had a meeting with the general of the Demon King's army. The subordinate Master Mercy at Jaime calms down and sinks to the ground, so they also stop feeling tension. One of the guys who ran into the room apologizes for interrupting and says they have an urgent matter. The guy is interrupted by Jaime. She turns to Mastermind and says that she will not be able to give him what he wants. She says not in this life. The girl already had her own plan. And both for Abel and for Mastermind. The guy lowers his head and looks at the floor. He is unhappy with the result of their conversation. He hoped that he could still be the Demon King's confidant. Then he will have incredible power and might. Mastermind steps towards the exit and leaves, slamming the door behind him. He decides that he will leave this conversation for later. Maybe he can think of something else, but first he needs to deal with Abel and his companions. Jaime is completely lowered to the ground. She thinks about it and remembers one important detail. Then the girl starts humming a cheerful song, smiling broadly. Her mood rose as she remembered Abel chained up. Jaime decides that she has nothing more to do in Mastermind his house. So she spreads her wings again and takes off, flying away. She thinks that something very funny is going to happen soon. It was still day outside, in the settlement. The streets were quiet except for the croaking of crows. All the houses looked faded and ruined. This was the tavern where Abel and Needs were staying. A bow was sweeping near the entrance of the tavern. He noticed that girls were approaching their tavern and immediately greeted them. He congratulated them on their return. The guy puts down his broom and goes to Layla and Galgo to escort them to the room. While the guy was climbing the stairs, he decided to ask if they really fought with the army of the Demon King and the Claymore Kingdom. Leela was at a loss for a couple of minutes, but confirmed the words that they fought with the Demon King. The guy gets excited and says he admires their team. The guy continues to climb the stairs and ask various questions about the travels of Abel's team. When the guy opens the door to the room, he freezes and looks dumbfounded at what is happening. Galgo is also surprised, so she opens her eyes wide. And Leela is still laughing at this moment and does not notice what is happening. There were a lot of people in white clothes in the room. They surrounded an Age who was trying to fight them off. One man tried to take the shield away, to which the girl began to be indignant. She was pushing because she couldn't get the sword out of its scabbard. All this time, the girl was guarding. The girl was not going to put the guy in danger. So she immediately came to the defense. Leela and Galgo immediately took off. They were going to fight back against the people in white clothes and protect Abel along with Manhwa. They understood that they would have to fight with the servants of the Ma. One of the men takes a dagger out of its sheath and says that they are doing all this for the sake of Mr. Mastermind. They are going to protect their leader, so they will fight with Galgo, Nij and Leela no matter what, no matter who interferes with them. The guy was still standing in the door, but when he saw the knife and the fact that a fight was starting, he screamed, asking what was going on. The guy was confused. He didn't understand why everyone started fighting abruptly, because a couple of seconds ago, everything was calm and they were cheerful. People in white clothes tried to hit the girls, but they dodged or blocked the blows. Galgo jumped from one opponent to another and struck with her clawed hands. Nades blocked all the blows with her shield. She fiercely fought back. Even though there were a lot of servants of the Mastermind, she didn't have time to draw her sword to start striking too. Leela wasn't ready for the fight. Someone swung at her. The girl jumped back and screamed as she was almost struck. She didn't have time to orient herself and also start attacking me, who's still blocking the blows of several opponents at once. She heard Leela scream, so she turned to her and told the girl to take a role in the guy. She thinks the girl should take them away. Leela immediately grabbed the guy, who was alarmed by the battle in the tavern. Leela watched the battle and did not want to leave to abandon her comrades, as she wanted to be useful. Then a thought occurs to the girl. She's trying to figure out how the people from Mastermind his house ended up in the tavern so easily. It only means that the guy had to let them in. Then the girl thinks about how the guy found out about their battle in another kingdom. She understands that something is clearly wrong. The guy couldn't find out about it from passers-by or other settlers. The girl guesses and abruptly becomes serious. The guy asks the girl to listen to him. Leela freezes as the guy's face quickly changes from scared to joyful. The guy says that the girl has a very strange look. The next second, the guy takes off his disguise and returns his appearance. All this time, it was Mastermind who only pretended to be a guy from the settlement. No one even guessed. Mastermind smiles and says that sooner or later they would have found out about it anyway. He wasn't going to hide for too long as he needed to act. The guy grunt Leela had been looking at Master's reincarnation with wide open eyes all this time. She couldn't believe that they had fallen for his tricks so easily and dragged Abel right into the enemy's lair. Mastermind presses her hand to her chest, smiles and says that she is glad to meet you. He says he is a former comrade of the useless Abel and then he gives his name. The guy pretends to be friendly. Nades and Galgo turned around to see what had happened when they saw Mastermind. They were also shocked how all three of them could overlook that the enemy was right in front of them. Mastermind claps his hands and says that he appreciates his comrades. The guy is interested in what a comrade is. He himself answers a comrade is someone who is strong and worthy to fight shoulder to shoulder with you, the one you treat as an allied. Cool, and this is mutual. Mastermind says that he neutralized the useless Abel in order to test the girls to find out what they are capable of. The girls looked around and looked with concern in their eyes and Abel, who was still unconscious. Mastermind points her hand at Leela and says that the girl's logic and judgment are useful. He assures her that it's all a waste of her abilities to stay with Nades, Galgo and Abel. The girl looks at Mastermind shock. He smiles and holds out his hand to her, inviting her to join him. He assumes that this is the best option for her. Leela is trembling. She is angry because the guy offers her to leave her comrades. Mastermind says that only selected people are among his comrades. He carefully selected everyone who could join the ranks of his sect. The guy was confident in his own exclusivity, so I tried to choose my own kind. He convinces the girl that he will give her as much money as she wants. Leela screams sharply that she refuses. She is very angry because the guy decided that the girl can be bribed with sweet speeches, money, or something else, as if she is a terrible and corrupt person. Leela continues and says that Mastermind attacked her friends. Mastermind looks at the girl dumbfounded, not understanding how she can refuse when she is offered such an offer. He was sure that anyone would agree to such a thing. She asks how he could think that the girl listens to him after all that he has done. She would never forgive him for what he had done to Abel. She doesn't need comrades like Mastermind. Mastermind decided to remove Abel and all the moments with Abel that they went through together, how she fought with her comrades. How Abel stood up for her. Mastermind closes his eyes, lowers his head. Then Mastermind snaps his fingers and says that if the girl does not want to join him, then he does not need her alive. He still hoped that the girl didn't care about Abel. He didn't understand how a useless person like him could have loyal comrades. He thinks he can find an acolyte as good as her. The guy gave a command to his minions to grab Lael. After the click, a loud crash heard. The Galgal turns around. A huge number of Mastermind minions appear near the tavern. They were all ready to fight for their guru. They all took out wooden batons intending to grab the girls. The Mastermind folds the seal, with the help of which it uses several spells and elements at once. The girls cover themselves, but this does not give results since the magic is too strong. The magic of the Mastermind breaks through the wall of the tavern. There is a crash in the sound of broken glass. The girls could not withstand the pressure of magic and they were thrown a huge distance away. They didn't have time to do anything, so they flew straight down to the ground. Leela fell to the ground right at the feet of the acolytes who were about to strike her. It was very difficult for Leela to get up, so she howled in pain and continued to lie on the ground. She couldn't find the strength to resist. Nade saw that the acolytes were going to stab Leela and grab her, so the girl immediately made a dash to Leela. Once in front of the girl, she began to defend herself with her shield. The acolytes beat on the shield with all possible weapons and demanded that the girl join them so she could have a chance of survival, but the girl continued to resist. Nade continued to hold the shield. It was very hard for her after a strong explosion in the room, man falling to the ground, but she shouldn't have retreated as Leela and Galgo are still unconscious. Servants also begin to approach Galgo, but the girl could not recover after a heavy fall. The acolytes kept banging on the shield, then demanding that Nade join them. Nade fought back with the last of her strength. She started to look around and saw Abel lying on the ground still unconscious. The girl did not know what to do in such a difficult situation. Mastermind watched his niece held on tenaciously to the last. He laughed and said it was all useless. He was sure that it was impossible to decipher his magic. The guy was sure of his victory. Layla began to recover a little. She tried to get up and do something, but nothing worked. The girl was thinking about Abel, who was lying defenseless on the ground. She couldn't just leave him before losing consciousness again. The last thing the girl remembers is the Mastermind, who smiled and stretched his hand towards her. Mastermind was surrounded by his servants, so the girl could not understand where Abel was now. Abel's body was still wrapped in a huge number of chains that prevented him from doing anything, and freeing himself right in front of the guy was a huge screen with a huge spell formula. The guy did not give up trying to decipher the spell and free himself, but the decryption took a very long time. He was almost desperate. The guy was breathing heavily. He spent a lot of time in this space trying to decipher the spell of the Mastermind. It was very hard for the guy, but he continued because he was not going to stay in prison for life. Abel suddenly heard a wing flap. At first he thought that he had imagined, since he had been alone for a long time. He assumed that he had gone mad because of a misunderstanding of how much time had passed. Still, the guy decides to look at the place where the sound was heard to understand what it was. He raises his head and opens his eyes wide in surprise. He didn't expect to meet someone in this space. The guy recognizes Jamie, the general of the Demon King's army. She was floating in the air right in front of him. The girl put her hands behind her back and looked with a smile at the guy. Who was I? The girl thought she would find a guy in this place. She thought Mastermind had done a good job since he had chained him up. She was going to have some fun with a guy to dispel boredom. The guy is interested in the question of how the girl was able to invade his space. But before the guy fully voices his question, Jamie interrupts him. She wonders if the guy wants to know how she invaded the spiritual world. She anticipates his every question. Jamie jumps up and says Abel is not very smart. She smiles and chuckles. It makes her laugh that the guy still doesn't understand anything. He has no idea what he has to do. Jamie says that if the guy does nothing and waits a little more time, he will lose everything he cherished. Jamie waved her hand and the picture of screen appeared right in front of the guy. The guy didn't understand what the girl did and why he continued to hang on the chains, and the girl began to turn her hand again. When the guy fully saw the screen, he opened his eyes wide with shock as he saw through how the acolytes were hitting with batons directly on the shield of Nietzsche, who had been protecting Leela all this time. He saw that Leela was in a serious condition. The guy saw that all the girls fought to the end, but they could not win this battle, since there were only 3 of them. It was an unfair battle because there were a lot of servants of the Mastermind. Abel was afraid for the girls. What worrying him most was that he couldn't help them. Jamie flies closer to the guy and starts whispering in his ear that the girls have sworn to each other to help people. And now, because of his obsession with stupid revenge, they will suffer, if not lose their lives. She kept provoking him to get angry and mad, but so far it hasn't worked. The guy looks at how the girls are suffering. He screams and asks to stop making girls suffer. He sees how the servants of the mass them continue to strike the girls. He was a real torture for Abel. He did not understand why he was destined to suffer. The guy sought revenge, but did not want those who went with him on the road to suffer. Leela, Galgo and Nade should have been safe. Jamie at this time does not pay attention to the guy's scream. She asks if the guy wants to save his companions. She says that in that case he needs to get out as soon as possible. She asks what the guy is waiting for. Abel starts trying to break out of the chains. He jerked his arms and legs while the girl tells him to try harder. The guy starts screaming with all his might that he had left either from the hopelessness of the whole situation or from anger that appeared after talking to the girl. Then he freezes and lowers his head, giving up. He does not make a sound. He just resigned himself to his fate and the fact that he will not be able to help the girls and get out of these chains. Jamie notices that the guy has given up. She says she understands everything. She says again that the guy is useless. She continues to speak negatively about him and says that nothing has changed in 20 years of imprisonment. She is sure that the fate of a guy is to be weak and helpless. Jamie says he's no good. She reminds him of his school years and how the heroes used him and then ran away. The girl grins and continues to provoke. She says that everything a guy claims to is revenge. She is sure that this is the only reason the guy is still alive. She thinks revenge is a great motivator. Abel opens his eyes wide and looks at the girl with horror. It was as if he suddenly realized something. The guy feels like something in his body is changing a dark or envelops him. Suddenly a small flame lights up inside the guy. He says he understands everything. He understands that only revenge kept him alive. It was the thought of revenge that constantly moved them and kept them on the path from the very beginning. He didn't need any comrades. The flame begins to blaze and flare out more. He didn't want to make friends and have fun with them. He only wanted to find his abusers and take revenge on them. The guy feels the flame flare out more. He opened his eyes, and black liquid flowed out of his eyes. The liquid was flowing down right all over his face. The guy looked creepy. Abel didn't look like himself. A dark aura began to envelop him, exactly the same aura as the Demon King. The guy felt the darkness engulfing him. He was very angry. Jaima looked with admiration at the transformation of the guy. She knew she could say the right words to help ignite the flames in his soul. She was angry at Mastermind after their conversation, so she decided to visit Abel. The girl planned to bring him to the boiling point because she knew that in this state, no one could stop Abel. Even the Mastermind will not be able to oppose him with anything. Suddenly a dark aura covers everything in space, from the screen with the spell formulas to the chains that held the guy. Absolutely everything is plunged into pitch darkness. Jamie and the guy were nowhere to be seen. They seemed to have disappeared. Suddenly, there are fairies who fly and illuminate the whole space. They looked like little spirits. They circled for a while and just sparkled in the dark until they were prevented by a huge beast. A huge white snake with red eyes appears. She opens her mouth wide and goes straight to these spirits to devour them. It seems that the fairies do not have time to do anything and they are swallowed up by a huge snake. At this time, Abel's hand appears out of the darkness. The guy abruptly waves his hand, which was aimed at Jamie. He used magic directly on the Demon King's general. The girl seems shocked as her half of her body has disappeared because of one swing. Think of the guy. Instead of a belly and a chest, there was an emptiness. The girl's body began to disappear little by little. Jamie starts laughing madly. She was amazed by the guy's new powers. She did not expect that the effect of her provocative speeches would be so strong. She was pleased with the result and looked forward to seeing something fun. Jamie was still smiling despite the fact that her half of her body had started to disappear. The girl realized that it was time to finish and leave. She was going to do just that. The black aura continued to fly in the air. It was no longer Abel, but a terrible and ruthless creature that most of all in the world longed for the deaths of its abusers. It was revenge that mattered most to him. At the moment, the guy didn't care about anything else. Abel was lying on the floor unconscious. The wreckage of the tavern lay around him. The others were nowhere in sight. Everyone seemed to just can't leave Abel alone. Suddenly, the guy opens his eyes. His eyes are wide open. As he surveys the surroundings, the guy decides that he needs to get to Mastermind as soon as possible. Otherwise, he will go crazy because of anger and the need for revenge. Suddenly, a strong explosion occurs right behind the Mastermind. The roof of the tavern shattered into pieces. Mastermind was in no hurry to turn around. He only heard a loud rumble and felt the danger behind him. He knew it was Abel, who was very angry at him because of his imprisonment. Mastermind decides to turn around. After all, he does it very slowly, as he does not understand how the guy could cause such a strong explosion and the destruction of the roof. He looks with horror at the tavern and what is left of it. Abel comes out of the tavern. He walks with a firm gait to the Mastermind. The dark aura envelops the guy. His arms and legs are very tense. It is clear that the guy is very angry. He wasn't going to talk to Mastermind or spare him. When Abel stops right in front of Mastermind, the guy calls out to him. He is trying to understand what happened to Abel and how he was able to get out of the trap in which he was imprisoned by Mastermind. He was confident in his seal and its durability. Leela watched all this from the ground. They will look terrifying. His whole body was tense. The dark aura did not leave his body but seemed to spread more to others. The guy's gaze was intense and malicious. You look like a predator at its prey. Leela raises her head to look at Abel and notices his gaze. She feels uneasy. That guy scared not only opponents, but also his comrades, because at the moment he really resembled a demon. Mastermind examines Abel more closely. He also notices that the guy is enveloped in a dark aura. He seems to be many times stronger than he was before. Also, the guy is haunted by the fact that Abel was still able to destroy the seal that Mastermind posed. He wonders if the guy could master the magic. It all fit together, his aura and the energy that came from him. Mastermind was very much afraid. The fear was felt by the people of Mastermind. They all immediately gathered around their guru. They were preparing for a battle with Abel. All the people of this settlement were ready to fight for Mast. Abel suddenly raised his hand and pointed his finger at Mastermind. He said that this is the last day of the guy that he lives. Abel is very aggressive. He wasn't going to back down. The disciples of Mastermind did not frighten him. Mastermind recoiled from fright. He was even more scared. He didn't think it would come to this. The guy wondered how he and his minions could get Abel out of this state. He understands that if they don't, then they're all dead. He had to come up with a new strategy. Suddenly, all the servants of the Mastermind throw up their clubs and run straight at Abel, who was still standing there. They were all going to attack him while he was doing nothing. People hoped that they would be able to beat the guy since there are more of them. The servants of the Mastermind did not have time to do anything. As Abel took off the next second folded the seal and managed to run through most of them using the spell petrification, many began to freeze and turn to stone. The guy didn't spare anyone. He dodged the clubs of the Mastermind people and again used this spell on everyone who stood in his way to accomplish his revenge. Most of the Mastermind people didn't have time to react, so they dropped their batons and tried to stop the petrification, but nothing worked. Nade walked over to Leela and started helping her up. She wanted to check if everything was okay with the girl because she had been lying on the ground for a long time. Nade wasn't very happy about Abel's appearance because he was scaring her. Leela, this time, looked with horror at the guy who dealt with several opponents in a matter of seconds. He just swept through the crowd and used the spell petrification. The girls did not understand why the villagers did not hesitate to move on Abel. Perhaps they really didn't realize how dangerous They could not believe that they believed so much in their guru Mastermind. One of the residents stood among his companions, who turned to stone and froze. The guy was looking at Abel, who was moving at a very fast speed. He was trying to figure out what was going on with the guy and how he could use. The guy was not allowed to think for a long time. Abel grabbed him by the buckle on his hoe and pulled him to himself. Abel glared at the guy. Then Abel raised his hand showing the spell he was going to use. The villager was very scared. She was looking at Abel, who was very strong and understood that he now looked very much just like the Demon King. The villager did not have time to do anything as Abel turned him into stone. When Abel finished with the last resident of the village, Mastermind approaches him and says that they haven't seen each other for a long time. He says the 20 years have passed very quickly and imperceptibly. Also, Mastermind was not sure that he would see the guy again. He says Abel fought well for it. He's still considered the guy not the strongest. The guy was constantly called useless. Mastermind raises his hand showing the seal. He reminds Abel that they are both spiritual magicians. Mastermind smiles grimly, looking straight into Abel's eyes. He challenges the guy to a fight. Mastermind says they need to deal with everything personally. He is confident of his victory, as the guy has spent a lot of effort on his minions. Mastermind thought that the battle with them could moderate his order and weaken him a little. Abel looks at the guy gloomily. Abel is not going to back down. Mastermind folds the seal and directs all her magic directly at Abel, who is still standing there. He thinks that Abel will not be able to resist against several elements and spells at once. But Abel puts his hand forward and creates a shield that protects him from being hit by spells. The shield resembles something of a screen on which spells usually appear. The guy is not in danger, so he just waits for the Mastermind to finish the attack. Mastermind is stunned. He begins to realize that he probably lost. Abel is standing in front of him. During this attack, he was deciphering his spell. The decryption is completed and Abel himself begins to use the same seal and spells. Mastermind across his arms in front of him and forms a ball that protects him from all of Abel's magic. He is waiting for Abel to finish attacking him to launch a counterattack. He still thinks he has hope. The guy didn't think that Abel would be able to decipher one of his most powerful spells so quickly. He specifically used it because it was difficult to Mastermind use, but the spell itself was powerful. Mastermind still gets hit and turning around realizes that ordinary magic is not so effective against him. Mastermind is going to attack again, only using a different technique. Mastermind has a unique and invincible power that cannot be compared to, namely his spiritual magic. The guy thinks he can use it to defeat Abel. He raises his hand and pointing it at Abel says ceiling. Abel starts to recoil. His head is lower and his arms just hanging down by the sides of his torso. It seemed that the spell had worked on the guy and he would now be imprisoned again, as during their arrival in the settlement. Leela looks at the guy and is horrified. She thinks that he will be trapped again. She couldn't do anything, so she just looked weirdly at the guy in the mastermind, who began to grin. Chains appear on the guy's wrist again. But Abel immediately raises his hand and breaks them. He doesn't let the spell work. Then he looks at his hand, needs a checking if everything is in order. Mastermind looks at him and does not understand how this is possible. Abel rubs the back of his head and asks what all this is about. He doesn't understand why Mastermind is still trying to resist him. Mastermind puts out his hand and cursing says that he should not approach him. He was very scared. They will wonders why they tried to shackle him again. Mastermind answers the question with a question. They will says that his spiritual magic is capable of a lot. He wonders if Mastermind really forgot about it. He says he's gotten a lot stronger since the last time they saw each other. Mastermind raises her hand and looks at her in horror as a chain has appeared on her wrist. He gasped in surprise. He couldn't understand how the guy could put a seal on his spiritual magic. The acolytes also look at the chain that appeared on the hand of the mastermind and do not understand how this is possible. They have never seen their guru outmaneuvered or outmaneuvered by anyone. Nay and Layla are also shocked. They thought it was impossible. They understand that Abel has already won and is now going to finish off the mastermind, while he can't do anything to him. Abel at this time raised his hand and clenched it into a fist, showing the mastermind a sign on the outer sides of the hand. He looked gloomily at the guy, how he screams and swears he wasn't going to mock the mastermind. Abel was serious and was going to finish the job. Mastermind at this time squeezes his hand. He understands that with the imposition of a seal on his spiritual magic, Abel secured victory for himself, since Mastermind will now not be able to oppose anything. He can't use magic and physical strength has never stood out. Suddenly, Masting gets hit in the face with a fist. His face twitches to the side after being hit. Then he looks dumbfounded at the floor as he was not ready for the blow. It takes him a very long time to recover from the blow. Mastermind was carried away by thoughts about the seal on his hand. Abel strikes again, and the master flies off a huge distance and then falls on his back. He speaks negatively about Abel, considering what he did to be the same spirit magic, only have a slightly different level. The guy still did not admit that he had lost, and now he would have to endure everything that Abel would do to him. Mastermind cannot return the favor or stand up as Abel continues to hit him with short breaks. Mastermind looks at Abel with horror. He wonders if it really wasn't difficult for Abel to do for his spell. He was sure that his spiritual magic was many times stronger. Then something seems to reach Mastermind, and he begins to smile. It seemed that the guy went crazy because he was being hit, and he just smiled. His face was covered with new redness. After a few seconds, Mastermind says that Abel's spiritual magic is great. He admits that the guy is really strong. Now he wanted the guy to be his companion. Mastermind recalls that since he can remember, what made him special was that the spirits chose him. Everyone bowed before the boy who was chosen by the spirits. He could only trust those with equal strength. He looked at everyone as if they were ants, because he considered them weak and unworthy. Mastermind recalls that during his schooling, Abel was also chosen as one of the heroes. He was chosen, which means he was worthy to be a companion of Mastermind. The guy did not immediately understand why Abel was elected at all, but during the attack of the Demon King 20 years ago, he felt that Abel had a huge potential that had not yet been revealed. And he understood why the guy was still elected. Abel started hitting Mastermind the face first with the right hand, then with the left, and so on. Several times he beat without stopping. He was furious, so he stopped interrupting and just kept hitting. Nay and Leela looked on in shock. Leela screamed for Abel to stop. She asks him to stop hitting Mastermind, but the guy didn't listen to her and continues. He didn't care about absolutely anything except his own revenge on the offenders that he was condemned to 20 years of imprisonment. The girl thinks that if it were Abel, he would be calm enough to listen to his enemies, but now it's as if another person has moved into him. She couldn't recognize him. He was violent and aggressive. Leela lowers her head and begins to cry in despair. She didn't want Abel to become so angry and merciless. She kept asking the guy to stop, and Abel kept hitting, not listening to anyone. He delivered the last blow and released Mastermind, who had already almost lost consciousness. Mastermind did not move and could not do anything. He was covered in abrasions and bruises. his glasses crack even more. Abel just stood in front of it for a while and then started asking questions he needed to find out where Stark was. Only Mastermind could know about this since he remained in Stark. The guy asked where Stark was. He needed to get to the last hero who had left him in prison for 20 years. The guy was waiting for an answer from Mastermind, as he was sure that he knew. Mastermind was breathing heavily after the blows. It seemed to him that the end had really come. He knew that he could not escape. So he had to tell people everything as it is. He decided to do just that. The guy was trying to gather all his strength to tell about the guy's whereabouts. Mastermind says that it is not he who is trapped by the Demon King, but Stark. Mastermind was still lying on the ground. Abel at this time folded the seal and sent it to the Mastermind. He was going to use the petrification spell. He didn't need Mastermind anymore unless it's just for revenge. Mastermind began to be covered with a stone shell. He was smiling as he addressed the guy. He began to beg for mercy, convincing them that they were friends with him. He tried to persuade Abel not to do it. But Abel wasn't listening. Mastermind is completely frozen in stone. Abel raised his foot a second later and hit the Mastermind with all his might. He was very angry because of Mastermind's last words that they were friends. Abel looked with disdain at the remnants of the Mastermind, which scattered on the ground. He says he doesn't need friends. He had a distorted idea of friendship because of the heroes who were in the same squad with him 20 years ago. At this moment, Leela calls the guy. She was very worried. The guy was in no hurry to turn around. He didn't want the girl to see him like this. He has already made a decision that the girl will definitely not like. Nate, Galgo and Leela were behind him all this time. Nate was holding Galgo in her arms, who was still unconscious, and Leela stood and looked at the guy's back. The girls recovered a little after the battle, but they had a lot of abrasions and wounds. Abel closed his eyes. He began to remember everything that had happened during their long journey. For some reason, it was at this moment, when he had already made the decision that he would leave them, that he began to remember various moments. He recalled how Leela had said she would go with him, how determined she was then. The girl then was full of enthusiasm, which bribed the guy. Moreover, he was pleased that the girl did not want to leave him alone. Abel recalled how Galgo will join their team to help the guy in tyranny. He didn't want to refuse her offer because Abel adored animals. The guy remembers how Need's promised to be with the guy until the victory over the Demon Lord. He remembers the very battle for the fortress where the girl showed that she could work well with him in a team. The guy remembers how they all fought monsters together, how they protected each other. It was then that he realized what comrades really should be. He could rely on them. The guy's last memory was of Leela smiling at him. She was the first person to meet him after 20 years of imprisonment, and she was the first companion who showed what a friend should be. The guy was happy while he was in this team, but he thought he couldn't travel with them anymore. He remembered with pain the previous teammates who constantly mocked him, but the guy still decided to leave. He turned around and smiling said that they would see each other again. He was confident that he could handle Stark and be able to see Leela, Galgo and Nate. Leela opened her eyes wide as she realized that the guy was going to leave them. She couldn't believe that the guy had made such a decision. She couldn't let him go, but it was already too late. The guy made a sharp jerk and rose up. He disappeared, leaving Nate, Leela and Galgo. He thought it would be better for both him and them. He wasn't going to come back until he defeated Stark. Leela fell to her knees and despair needs over to her to calm her down. He was gone, so she started crying. She couldn't believe that the guy just walked away. Galgo began to recover. She notices that Leela is crying and Needs tries to calm her down. There is absolute silence on the street. Galgo understands that the fight is over and Abel is gone.